Sector 0 isn't a city. It's a graveyard waiting for names. Dredge. A cyber-noir sci-fi thriller. Chapter 1. Acid rain drummed against the cracked permaglass windshield of the hover rig. The drops hit the hot metal hood and vaporized, sending plumes of chemical steam into the bruised purple glow of the Sector 0 streetlights. Mercer steered the dying vehicle down the flooded avenue. The portside repulsor turbine whined, a high-pitched scream of failing magnetic bearings. Smog choked the Neo-Los Angeles dredge. The air tasted of ozone, raw sewage, and burnt synthetic rubber. Towering hab-blocks squeezed the street into a narrow canyon, their concrete flanks stained black with decades of industrial runoff. Holographic advertisements flickered through the haze above, selling orbital colony real estate to people who scrounged for clean water. Mercer coughed. The sound lacked human resonance. A harsh, mechanical rattle vibrated deep in his chest. His cybernetic lung fought the toxic air, the internal microfilters clogging with particulate lead and sulfur. He slammed a closed fist against his own sternum. The impact forced the failing turbine inside his ribcage to cycle. Percussive maintenance damages the thoracic housing, Proxy said. The android sat in the passenger seat. Proxy possessed a dented copper alloy chassis and a mismatched pair of optical sensors. The left eye burned a steady amber. The right eye twitched, sparking a faint blue arc of static electricity every few seconds. The housing holds, Mercer grunted. He kept his hands at 10 and 2 on the cracked steering yoke. Check the grid map. Find the cross street. We cross Vector Avenue in 40 meters, Proxy chirped. The android's vocal synthesizer mimicked a chipper, pre-collapse customer service tone. It contrasted with the rust flaking off its neck joints. The destination coordinates sit at the end of the block. I detect a 92% probability of catastrophic engine failure before we reach the curb. The hover rig decided to prove the machine correct. The port turbine seized. A shudder ripped through the vehicle frame. The rig dropped 2 feet, the undercarriage scraping the uneven Ferretocrete road with a shower of orange sparks. Mercer wrestled the yoke, fighting the dead weight. He guided the smoking chassis toward the curb, crashing into a pile of discarded nutrient paste tubes. The engine died. Silence rushed into the cabin, broken by the hiss of the rain and the click-whir of Mercer's failing lung. Mercer kicked the driver's side door open. He stepped into the flooded gutter. His heavy combat boots broke the surface of a chemical puddle, swirling a rainbow of leaked coolant. He wore a dark canvas duster, the hem frayed and heavy with moisture. He looked at the storefront across the sidewalk. A faded neon sign sputtered above the reinforced steel security door. Vane's Analog and Salvage. Next door sat a sprawling, windowless bunker painted in drab urban camouflage. The faded insignia of the sector peacekeepers adorned the facade. The blast doors remained sealed tight. Rust bled from the hinges. The precinct registers 0 power consumption, Proxy noted, stepping out of the rig. The android stood in the acid rain, immune to the corrosive drops. The peacekeepers abandoned this sector 14 months ago. Law costs money, Mercer said. The dredge ran out of credits. Mercer slung a heavy canvas duffel bag over his shoulder. The nylon straps strained against the weight of a disassembled kinetic rail rifle and a dozen magnetic magazines. He approached the shop. He pushed the heavy steel door. A bell chimed, an actual brass bell hanging from a piece of twine. The sound felt alien in a city ruled by digital chimes and synthetic sirens. The interior offered a sanctuary of dry, stagnant air. The space smelled of machine oil, soldering flux, and old dust. Shelves towered to the ceiling, crammed with relics. Cathode ray tubes, copper wiring spools, mechanical keyboards, and rows of inert silicon chips. A man sat behind a long, mahogany counter at the back of the room. Kalen Vane wore a leather mechanic's apron over a faded gray thermal shirt. Silver streaked his dark hair. He possessed the thick, calloused hands of a man who worked metal for a living. He kept a brass ocular loop wedged into his right eye socket, studying the exposed gears of a 20th-century pocket watch. Kalen set his precision screwdriver down. He looked up. He took in the canvas duster, the heavy duffel bag, and the glitching android. He noted the high-slung holster on Mercer's right hip, holding a scarred pulse pistol. "I salvage tech," Kalen said. His voice carried the rough texture of a man who breathed too much solder smoke. "I do not salvage trouble. The door locks from the inside. Feel free to use it on your way out." "I bring hard currency," Mercer said. He walked to the counter. He dropped a stack of physical titanium credits onto the polished mahogany. The metal coins clinked. "I need an isolation room. I need a grade 4 respiratory microfilter. And I need a place to stash a dead rig where the scavengers leave the catalytic converters intact." Kalen glanced at the titanium coins. Hard credits bypassed the digital grid. They left zero data trail. "The rig stays in the back alley," Kalen instructed. "The scavengers fear the automated plasma turret mounted above my loading dock. I offer a room upstairs. 4 walls, a cot, and a door with a manual deadbolt." "I require the filter," Mercer pressed. His chest rattled. "Your companion requires a diagnostic check," Proxy interrupted. The android stepped up to the counter. Its amber eye locked onto Kalen. His cybernetic lung functions at 41% capacity. The lead particulates threaten to enter his bloodstream. He tracks a bounty. He needs peak efficiency. Mercer threw a backhand strike. His knuckles clipped Proxy's copper cranium. A dull metallic clang echoed in the shop. "Keep your vocal synthesizer offline," Mercer told the machine. Kalen pulled the loop from his eye. He studied Mercer's pale, sweat-sheen face. "You hunt men," Kalen stated. "You look like a man who catches bullets for a living. I run a quiet business here." "Sector 0 lacks quiet," Mercer said. "I carve out my own peace," Kalen countered. A sound drifted through the heavy velvet curtains separating the retail floor from the back rooms. Music. A piano. Someone played a complex, melodic piece. The notes tumbled over each other, pure and clean, slicing through the grime of the shop. Mercer shifted his gaze toward the velvet curtain. "Synthetic acoustics?" "A Steinway upright," Kalen said. A defensive edge hardened his tone. "Analog wire and wood. I imported it from the upper terraces. My wife plays. She prefers the classics. She appreciates the structure." "She plays well," Mercer said. "She brought culture to this dustbin," Kalen said. He swept the titanium credits off the counter into a hidden drawer. He reached under the mahogany and pulled out a heavy iron key attached to a block of wood. He tossed it to Mercer. "Room 3. Top of the stairs," Kalen said. "I possess the microfilter you need. I keep it locked in the basement cage. I retrieve it in the morning. Tonight you sleep." "Tonight I calibrate my gear," Mercer said. Mercer grabbed the canvas duffel. He gestured for Proxy to follow. They moved toward the narrow wooden staircase in the corner of the shop. The wooden treads groaned under Mercer's heavy boots. The stairwell smelled of ancient mildew and industrial bleach. They reached the second floor. A long, narrow hallway stretched before them, illuminated by a single, flickering sodium vapor bulb. Mercer slotted the iron key into the lock of room 3. The deadbolt engaged with a heavy, satisfying clack. He pushed the door open. The room offered minimal comfort. A synthetic weave mattress rested on a steel frame. A cracked washbasin clung to the wall. A single window overlooked the flooded street below. Mercer dropped the duffel bag in the corner. He ignored the cot. He walked straight to the window. He pushed the torn privacy blind aside. Sector 0 sprawled beneath him, a maze of glowing neon and deep absolute shadows. He studied the tactical layout. The abandoned Peacekeeper precinct sat silent next door, a concrete tomb. Across the street, a towering hab block blocked the horizon, its facade dotted with thousands of illuminated barred windows. He scanned the alleyways. He scanned the rooftops. He looked for the telltale heat shimmer of active cloaking fields. He looked for the erratic movement of scav gangs. Nothing moved except the acid rain. Sector scan reveals 0 immediate hostiles, Proxy said. The android stood in the center of the room. It powered down its primary motor functions, locking its joints into a rigid standby posture. The amber eye dimmed. Mercer let the blind fall. He turned his back on the city. He unclipped the pulse pistol from his thigh holster. He pressed the release stud. The spent thermal battery dropped into his palm. He retrieved a fresh, glowing green power cell from his coat pocket. He slammed it into the grip. The weapon whined, a high-pitched electronic hum signaling a full charge. He checked the magnetic rails. He wiped a speck of dust from the emitter nozzle. He placed the weapon on the small bedside table. He angled the grip outward for a rapid draw. He sat on the edge of the steel frame. The mattress compressed, thin and unyielding. The pain in his chest flared, a sharp, burning needle buried deep behind his ribs. He unclasped the heavy canvas duster, letting it fall to the floor. He unbuttoned his shirt, exposing the scarred flesh and the dull gray metal plating of the cybernetic lung housing. He listened to the rhythmic click-whir of the failing turbine. He matched his breathing to the mechanical pace. Downstairs, the piano music stopped. The silence rushed back, heavy and oppressive. The dredge reclaimed its territory. Mercer lay back on the thin mattress. He kept his right hand hovering inches from the grip of the pulse pistol. He stared at the water stains on the cracked plaster ceiling. He closed his eyes. He willed the machine in his chest to keep spinning until dawn. He waited for the dredge to show its true face. Chapter 2. Structural failure imminent. The vocal synthesizer cut the darkness. Mercer opened his eyes. He bypassed grogginess. He transitioned to combat readiness. Muscle memory took control. His hand slid across the synthetic weave mattress. His fingers closed around the textured, polymer grip of the pulse pistol. He rolled. His boots hit the ferritocrete floor. He moved toward the single window. He pressed his back against the damp plaster wall. He avoided the direct line of sight. He used the emitter nozzle of the weapon to lift the edge of the privacy blind 1 inch. Thermal bloom detected, Proxy stated. The android stood motionless in the center of the room. Its amber eye locked onto the floorboards. A high-mass vehicle approaches the structure. Repulsor output indicates a mil-spec Goliath-class transport. Armor composition registers as depleted uranium mesh. The kinetic shockwave hit the building. A sound like a collapsing starship bulkhead tore the humid air. The vibrations rattled Mercer's teeth. On the ground floor, the reinforced steel security door separated from its magnetic hinges. Metal shrieked. In the street, the massive armored Mag-Lev truck idled in the flooded avenue. Rain turned to hissing steam against the glowing blue repulsor coils underneath the chassis. The vehicle sported angled carbon composite armor plating. Matte black paint absorbed the sickly orange glow of the street lamps. Mud terrain treads wrapped around heavy alloy wheels. The exhaust vents pumped a thick plume of ionized plasma into the smog. Breach successful, Proxy narrated the events below. Multiple hostiles enter the retail space. Biometric scans reveal heavy cybernetic augmentation. Subdermal plating. Synthetic musculature. Weapons free. Mercer listened. The sounds of a struggle bled through the floorboards. A heavy thud. The crash of breaking glass. A man's grunt of pain. Kalen Vane fought the intruders. The distinct crack of a high-voltage electrical discharge followed. The smell of scorched ozone drifted up the stairwell. The proprietor sustained a localized neural shock, Proxy reported. The amber eye flickered. I detected the discharge signature of a volt baton. A lethal dose for individuals with compromised heart conditions. Kalen Vane possesses an analog pacemaker. His survival remains uncertain. Two figures emerged from the ruined storefront. They wore heavy tactical mesh coats and breathing masks. Chrome plating gleamed on their exposed forearms. They dragged a third person between them. A woman. She fought their grip. She wore a white silk robe over a nightgown. The delicate fabric tore at the shoulder seam, exposing pale skin to the acid rain. Dark hair whipped around her face. She dug her bare heels into the cracked pavement, fighting for traction. The augmented men hauled her toward the vehicle like a cargo container. She twisted her upper torso. She broke the grip of the smaller man on her left. She swung a closed fist. Her knuckles connected with the man's synthetic jawline. A sharp metallic crack echoed in the concrete canyon. The man cursed. A guttural sound of pain. Grab her legs. Pin her down. The larger man wrapped a thick arm around her waist. He lifted her off the pavement. She kicked. Her heel caught the big man in the kneecap. He grunted. He stumbled a half step. Kalen. The woman's scream cut the hum of the idling repulsors. Kalen. Help me. The sound bounced off the hab-block walls. It carried the raw edge of absolute terror. The smaller man dropped to his knees. He wrapped his arms around her thrashing legs. He squeezed her knees together. He locked them in place. They hoisted her parallel to the ground. She bucked. She arched her spine. She fought the combined mass of two cyber-augmented enforcers. She repeated the name. Kalen. The big man freed his right hand. He struck her. A flat, heavy slap across the face. Flesh hitting flesh. The impact jolted her cranium. The scream died in her throat. She went limp. The sheer force of the blow stunned her. Mercer tracked the big man. The pulse pistol rested motionless on the windowsill. The illuminated targeting reticle aligned with the center of the big man's chest. The distance measured 35 meters. A downward angle from the second story. An easy shot. Mercer applied pressure to the trigger. He felt the resistance. He reached the break point. 2 more pounds of pressure, and a superheated plasma bolt would shatter the Mag-Lev's driver's side window and melt the big man's skull. He calculated the geometry. Distance, wind, angle, plasma dissipation. He held the power of life and death in a millimeter of trigger travel. He held his breath. He evaluated the variables. This situation belonged to the Dredge. He held zero jurisdiction in this sector. He operated as a freelance entity. Firing a shot entered him into a blood feud with augmented strangers. A missed shot risked hitting the woman in the rear compartment. A ricochet off the carbon armor risked sending molten slag flying into adjacent hab units. These men operated with zero concern for sector peacekeepers. They parked a stolen tactical transport 20 feet from a precinct. They made maximum noise. They feared nothing in Sector 0. They executed a coordinated extraction. 1 man drives, 2 men grab. They possessed a plan, heavy weapons, and ruthless efficiency. They capitalized on the woman's stunned silence. They tossed her into the armored cabin of the Mag-Lev. She hit the synthetic leather bench. The smaller man climbed into the cabin. He pulled a length of industrial, magnetic binding from his mesh coat. He snapped the cuffs around her wrists. He locked her hands together. The big man slammed the heavy gull-wing door. He sprinted to the driver's side. He hauled himself behind the yoke. The reinforced doors sealed with a pneumatic hiss. The Mag-Lev's repulsors whined, reaching a deafening pitch. The big man engaged the thrusters. The vehicle lunged. The rear end squatted under the immense torque. It tore down the flooded avenue, heading toward the dark silhouette of the steel peaks. The blue thruster glow shrank into twin pinpricks and vanished in the smog. The scent of ozone and vaporized coolant reached the second-story window. Silence reclaimed the basin. A thick, oppressive quiet replaced the violence. Mercer lowered the pulse pistol. He removed his finger from the trigger guard. He kept his body hidden behind the cracked plaster wall. He scanned the street. He checked the alleyways and rooftops for a cloaked lookout. Zero movement occurred. He watched the hardware store. The shattered security door gaped open, a jagged black mouth. Rain blew into the interior. Shadows pooled between the aisles of salvage tech. Zero citizens emerged to chase the truck. Zero individuals emerged to check the damage. The name the woman screamed, Kaylin, yielded zero response. Mercer looked at the adjacent hab-blocks. A yellow light flicked on in a third-story window. A shadow moved behind the grimy permaglass. 3 seconds passed. The light died. The sector heard the kinetic breach. The sector heard the woman scream. The sector chose blindness. The sector chose deafness. Survival in the dredge required ignoring the violence of strangers. You lock your deadbolt, and you pray the monsters keep driving. The Peacekeeper precinct sat silent. The armored blast doors remained shut. The law slept or stayed bought. The probability of the female surviving the extraction falls below 12%, Proxy calculated. The android processed the departure trajectory. The industrial mag cuffs restrict blood flow to her extremities. The perpetrators possess military-grade hardware. Not our bounty, Mercer grunted. Not our problem. Mercer left the window. He let the blind fall into place. He sealed the street lamp glare. He checked the power cell of his weapon. An old habit to burn nervous energy. The green indicator light glowed in the dim room. He placed the pistol on the bedside table. He angled the grip for a rapid draw. He walked to the cracked wash basin. He turned the rusted tap. Brown liquid spit from the faucet, followed by a clear stream smelling of chlorine and copper. He cupped his hands. He splashed the tepid liquid over his face and neck. The moisture cut the dust. It left his skin tight. He walked to the steel frame. He collapsed onto the thin mattress. The metal springs groaned. He stared at the ceiling. A water stain formed the shape of a jagged skull over the light fixture. He closed his eyes. Mercer needed sleep. He needed his synthetic muscles to stop vibrating from the adrenaline spike. He came to this neon-bleached purgatory for one specific reason. He desired a quiet night. He wanted to exist in a space without pulse fire, without corporate warrants, without the stench of vaporized blood. He craved a flat line. He listened to the muted sounds bleeding through the floorboards. The hiss of the rain. The rumble of a subterranean transit train. The drip of water from the cracked wash basin. Peace. One night, Mercer spoke to the dark ceiling. One night without a trigger. He let the fatigue pull him under. He sank into a heavy, suffocating sleep. He dreamt of nothing. Zero cyber-augmented cartels. Zero flashing sirens. The silence of the Sector Zero smog pressed against the permaglass. In the flooded alley, the dead hover rig cooled in the shadows. In the shop, Kaylin Vane lay unconscious on the ferrocrete floor, his analog heart fighting the residual electricity of the neural shock. The Dredge shut its eyes. The sector secured its final quiet hour. Chapter 3. Gray luminescence replaced the sickly orange street lamps of Sector 0. The morning smog cycle began. A thick, chemical fog rolled through the concrete canyons, swallowing the towering hab-blocks. Mercer pushed the thin synthetic blanket off his chest. The cybernetic lung inside his ribcage clicked. The turbine spun, fighting the stagnant air of the rented room. Mercer strapped the pulse pistol to his right thigh. He pulled the heavy canvas duster over his shoulders. He grabbed his duffel bag. Proxy stood beside the cracked wash basin. The android remained locked in standby posture. Its amber optical sensor flared to life, casting a golden beam across the peeling plaster. Atmospheric toxicity registers at lethal thresholds, Proxy stated. The machine processed the environmental data. The acid rain ceased. A dense aerosolized sulfur fog replaces the precipitation. I advise deploying your rebreather mask. The rebreather limits peripheral vision, Mercer said. He slung the duffel bag over his shoulder. Status on the shop owner. His analog pacemaker stabilized at 0400 hours, Proxy reported. He regained consciousness. His vital signs indicate severe physical trauma and acute psychological shock. Mercer exited the room. He descended the narrow wooden staircase. The wooden treads groaned under his heavy combat boots. Proxy trailed him, its metal joints clicking in the quiet stairwell. The retail floor resembled a war zone. The gray morning light filtered through the shattered storefront, illuminating total destruction. The raiders executed a thorough demolition. Smashed cathode ray tubes coated the ferrocrete floor in a layer of jagged glass. Coils of copper wire tangled like dead vines. The heavy mahogany service counter rested on its side. Deep gouges from cybernetic combat boots scarred the polished wood. Kalen Vane sat secured to a structural steel pillar in the center of the room. The raiders utilized industrial mag cuffs to bind his wrists around the metal beam. A thick strip of metallic duct tape sealed his mouth. He breathed through his nose in ragged, desperate pulls. A canvas of fresh bruises covered his face. A massive purple hematoma forced his left eye shut. His right eye tracked Mercer. Panic and pain radiated from the man's posture. Mercer drew a thermal combat knife from his belt. He thumbed the activation stud. The high-carbon steel blade glowed a bright, angry orange. He approached the trapped shop owner. He pressed the superheated metal against the magnetic locking mechanism of the cuffs. The synthetic polymers melted. The magnetic seal failed with a sharp hiss. The cuffs popped open. Kalen collapsed against the steel pillar. Mercer caught him by the shoulder. He ripped the metallic tape from Kalen's mouth. "Breathe deep," Mercer ordered. "Force the oxygen into your bloodstream." Kalen gasped. He coughed, a wet sound originating deep in his lungs. He rubbed his chafed wrists. He stared at the ruined aisles of his life's work. "Lyra!" Kalen choked the word into the humid air. "They took her." "I witnessed the extraction from the second-story window," Mercer said. He deactivated the combat knife and returned it to the sheath. "They threw her into the armored cabin of a Mag-Lev transport." Kalen staggered to his feet. He leaned his weight against the support pillar. He dragged his boots through the shattered glass, heading toward the rear living quarters. Mercer followed. Proxy scanned the debris, analyzing the specific force required to smash the antique hardware. The heavy velvet curtain separating the rooms lay shredded on the floorboards. The living quarters matched the retail space in devastation. The imported Steinway upright piano sat in the corner, reduced to splintered mahogany and snapped acoustic wire. The raiders destroyed the ivory keys. In the center of the room, sat a reinforced titanium data vault. The heavy vault door hung open. Slag pooled on the wooden floorboards, hardened into jagged black puddles. The stench of scorched ozone and melted polymers hung thick in the confined space. They burned the locking mechanism, Mercer noted. He crouched beside the ruined vault. He tapped the hardened slag with the steel toe of his boot. A thermal plasma lance. Military grade. They brought heavy cutting tools. This action elevates the strike above a random street gang raid. This action requires specific intent. Kalen stared at the empty vault. He ignored the melted titanium. The vault held my digital identity, Kalen whispered. It held my orbital colony transit visas. My exit strategy. The credits mean nothing. They dragged Lyra into the street. She fought them. She screamed my name. She fought the raiders, Mercer confirmed. She caught the smaller augmented hostile in the synthetic jawline with a closed fist. She possesses a delicate nature, Kalen said. A wet sob broke his voice. I brought her down from the upper terraces. She hates the smog. She hates the noise. I promised her a fortress. Kalen reached for a holographic projector lying on a shattered end table. His swollen fingers fumbled with the activation stud. A three-dimensional image flickered into existence, casting a pale blue light across the ruined room. Mercer studied the hologram. A woman with dark hair piled high. She possessed striking, oversized eyes. She wore a tailored silk dress. A calculated smile touched her lips. The eyes remained cold and evaluating. She looked like a woman who assessed the credit value of every object in the room the moment she crossed the threshold. Stand up, Mercer said. Wash the dried blood off your face. We need to talk to the sector peacekeepers. Captain Rix, Kalen said. His precinct sits next door. He sleeps deep, Mercer said. Kalen stumbled to the attached washroom. He turned the rusted tap. He splashed tepid water over his bruises. He emerged wearing a clean canvas work shirt. The clean fabric made the purple swelling on his face stand out in violent contrast. He grabbed a set of magnetic vehicle keys from a hook on the wall. I need an intercept squad, Kalen said. A frantic edge sharpened his tone. The sector stayed in bed during the breach. They fear the dark. In the daylight, they will help. I repair their moisture vaporators. I extend their credit lines. Credit lines by loyalty in corporate boardrooms, Mercer said. In the Dredge, people value a pulse over a debt. They walked out of the shop. The gray smog filtered the morning sun into a pale, sickly haze. The street remained empty. A rusted scavenger drone hovered past them, its optical sensors scanning the flooded gutters for scrap metal. They approached the drab concrete bunker next door. The peacekeeper precinct. Kalen raised his fist. He pounded on the heavy armored blast door. The metal rang hollow. The blast door slid open. A thick-necked man stood in the threshold. He wore a dark gray uniform shirt. The fabric strained against his heavy torso. A silver badge pinned to his chest read, Captain Rix. He held a thermal bulb of steaming synthetic CAF. He looked at Kalen's bruised face. He looked at the shattered analog shop down the block. He looked at Mercer. He displayed zero surprise. He radiated pure exhaustion. Kalen, Rix said. He took a sip from the thermal bulb. You look terrible. They took her, Kalen said. Panic took control of his voice. They took Lyra. They melted my data vault. They bound me to a pillar. You sit 20 meters away. I heard the kinetic breach, Rix said. His tone remained flat. He offered zero empathy. I heard the Mag-Lev engine. You heard the breach. Kalen lunged at the doorframe. He grabbed the edge of the blast door. You heard the strike and you stayed inside your concrete box. I operate a skeleton crew, Kalen. I heard a Goliath-class repulsor drive. I heard permaglass shatter. That translates to multiple heavy augmented hostiles in a hurry. They took my wife. We need to mobilize a pursuit squad. Contact the high-rise enforcers. Alert the sector grid. Rix shook his head. He took another sip of CAF. 0 pursuit squads today, Kalen. Explain this refusal. Look at the street, Rix said. He gestured with his free hand, holding the thermal bulb. Do you see a line of volunteers eager to catch a plasma bolt in the chest? She waits in the wastelands. She belongs to the wastelands, Rix said. Chasing that armored transport generates more body bags. I walked to the alley behind your shop an hour ago. I ran a scanner over the tire tracks. I found a spent plasma casing and a dropped power cell from a custom sonic cannon. Kalen stared at the captain. Confusion clouded his remaining good eye. Explain the significance. Rix sighed. He looked at Mercer. He sized up the canvas duster and the high-slung pulse pistol. He turned his attention back to Kalen. It means Mick Drax drove that Mag-Lev, Rix said. Mick and his brother Jesse. The Drax brothers do not rob analog salvage shops. They hit corporate data centers and Mag-Lev currency trains. They possess military-grade cybernetics, subdermal plating, neural accelerators. They flayed a sector enforcer alive in the northern grid last summer. They left him hanging from a transit rail. The name hit the humid air like a block of ice. Kalen swayed. His face lost its remaining color. The name Drax carried weight across the entire urban sprawl. It represented absolute, unrestrained violence. It meant facing men who killed for sport. Mick Drax, Kalen whispered. The fight drained out of his spine. Affirmative, Rix said. They take 0 prisoners. They negotiate with no one. You ride after them. You hit a prepared ambush. You die in the radioactive dirt. I refuse to lead my underfunded precinct into a slaughterhouse. But Lyra. File an insurance claim on the melted vault, Kalen. Forget the woman. She came from the orbital colonies anyway. She belongs to the monsters. Rix retreated into the air-conditioned interior of the precinct. He pushed the control panel. The heavy armored blast door slid shut. The magnetic deadbolt engaged with a loud, definitive snap. Kalen stood on the ferritocrete sidewalk. The morning smog swirled around him. He turned his head toward the west, looking at the dark, jagged outline of the steel peaks. The reality of his isolation settled over him, a heavy, suffocating blanket. He stood alone in the chemical fog, a man holding a set of magnetic keys and a broken promise. Mercer watched the shop owner. Proxy stepped beside Mercer. The proprietor's heart rate indicates clinical shock, Proxy stated. His core temperature drops. Let him process the loss, Mercer said. A man needs to touch the bottom before he finds the strength to climb. Mercer turned his gaze to the shattered storefront. He thought about the thermal plasma lance. He thought about the precise extraction. He thought about the Drax brothers descending into the dredge for a specific target. The pieces failed to align. A corporate raiding crew ignores an analog salvage shop unless the shop holds a secret worth the risk. Mercer returned to the ruined building. He intended to inspect the melted data core a second time. He intended to find the hidden variable. He left Kalen Vane staring at the mountains. Chapter 4. Mercer returned to the ruined living quarters. Proxy trailed a step behind. The android's optical sensor cut through the airborne dust, painting the hardened slag with a golden beam. The thermal plasma lance reached temperatures exceeding 4,000 degrees, Proxy stated. The machine cataloged the destruction. The raiders bypassed the biometric scanners. They opted for brute force. The action indicates a tight operational timetable. Mercer nudged a piece of distorted titanium with the steel toe of his combat boot. The metal clinked against the wooden floorboards. Brute force requires time. They lingered in the dredge. They took a massive risk. They parked a Goliath-class transport in the open. They knew the vault contained a prize worth the exposure. Kalen Vane pushed through the shredded velvet curtain. The gray morning smog filtered through the shattered storefront, casting a pale silhouette around his wide frame. He carried a heavy carbon steel pry bar. He ignored Mercer. He ignored the android. He stopped 3 paces from the destroyed vault. Kalen slammed the pry bar into the wooden floor. The heavy steel wedge bit deep into the imported oak. He threw his entire body weight against the fulcrum. The antique wood snapped. A sharp crack echoed in the ruined room, drowning the ambient hiss of the city outside. He drove the tool into the gap. He ripped 3 more boards from the floor joists. Splinters flew into the stagnant air. The smell of ancient soil and rot filled the confined space. Kalen dropped the pry bar. The steel clattered against the floor. He plunged his bruised arms into the dark cavity beneath the foundation. His shoulder muscles bunched under his canvas work shirt. He hauled a heavy, fire-resistant polymer bag into the gray light. He dropped the bag beside the melted vault. He unsealed the magnetic closure. Physical currency spilled onto the splintered wood. Stacks of untraceable titanium chips. Bundles of high-denomination cred sticks bound with copper wire. The pile represented absolute freedom in a sector defined by absolute poverty. 80,000 hard credits, Kalen said. His voice cracked. He stared at the fortune. I kept it off the digital grid. I kept it off the corporate tax ledgers. The orbital colonies demand untraceable physical assets for entry visas. My exit strategy. He grabbed a handful of the titanium chips. He shoved the metal toward Mercer's chest. It belongs to you, Kalen said. Mercer kept his hands at his sides. He looked at the banded cred sticks. He looked at the pile covering the floor. He looked at Kalen's bruised, desperate face. Put the credits back in the polymer bag, Kalen. You demand more. Kalen's voice spiked. Frantic energy tightened the cords of his neck. Take the shop deed. Take the salvage inventory. Take the terrestrial land rights I hold in Sector 4. I possess the titles in a lockbox at the central bank. I possess 0 use for a salvage shop in the dredge. Then take the credits. Kalen thrust the metal higher. Take the currency and track them. You possess the combat hardware. You understand the wastelands. Run them down before they cross the perimeter. Mercer stepped back. He crossed his arms over his chest. The synthetic fabric of his duster rustled against the holstered pulse pistol. I hunt fugitives on corporate warrants, Kalen. I collect bounties authorized by the high-rise tribunals. I do not run private retrieval jobs. You possess the tracking skills, Kalen pleaded. He dropped the coins. The titanium rang against the wood. He grabbed the lapels of Mercer's duster. His swollen knuckles turned white against the dark canvas. They dragged Lyra into the toxic rain. She understands nothing of this violence. She requires synthetic nutrient patches. She requires climate control. The Drax brothers will destroy her. Mercer stared down at the hands gripping his coat. He studied the desperation warping Kalen's beaten features. Release the fabric, Mercer commanded. The tone offered 0 room for debate. Kalen opened his fingers. He stepped back. His chest heaved. He gasped for oxygen in the humid, dust-choked room. You refused the payment, Kalen said. Resignation replaced the panic. The sound resembled a heavy iron door slamming shut. Why? Currency creates an employer-employee dynamic, Mercer explained. I take your 80,000, I work for you. I follow your instructions. I lack the patience to take orders from a man who suffers a neural shock while a raiding crew dismantles his life. Kalen stared at the scattered cred sticks. He looked at the ruined analog equipment filling his shop. The reality of his impotence crushed the breath from his lungs. He dropped to his knees. He began stuffing the banded stacks back into the fireproof bag. His movements jerked. Raw nervous energy drove his hands. He sealed the magnetic closure. He stood up. He gripped the heavy nylon handle. Then you walk away, Kalen said. You leave her to the monsters. I intend to drive west, Mercer said. Kalen stopped. He stared at Mercer. West. Following the Mag-Lev. The Drax brothers offended my internal protocols, Mercer stated. He kept his voice flat. He avoided theatrics. They parked a stolen military transport 20 meters from a peacekeeper precinct. They utilized a thermal plasma lance to breach a civilian structure. They grabbed a hostage and engaged their thrusters without taking a single return shot. That level of arrogance bothers me. The peacekeeper hiding behind a blast door bothers me. It disrupts my sense of order. You intend to hunt them. For free. I hunt for the balance, Mercer said. And I hunt because I require a destination today. But I execute the pursuit my way. Your way. I track the plasma signature. I locate the Mag-Lev. If your wife breathes, I put her in the passenger seat. If she caught a stray bolt, I bring the Drax brothers back in the cargo hold. Wrapped in synthetic tarps. Kalen swallowed. The bruised skin around his good eye pulled tight. She lives. They value her. For ransom. Prepare your mind for alternative outcomes. She lives, Kalen repeated. He gripped the polymer bag tight against his ribs. When do we leave? I leave in 10 minutes. I need to purge my dead hover rig in the alley and gather my hardware. I will prep my transport. Mercer shook his head. You stay here. You seal your broken storefront. You deposit your hard credits in a secure subterranean vault. Kalen squared his shoulders. He pushed his jaw forward. Sheer defiance fought through the pain of his injuries. She carries my name. I paid for her relocation from the upper terraces. I refuse to sit in this ruined box, waiting for a stranger to deliver a corpse. I go with you. You represent a massive liability, Kalen. You slow my pace. I own an Outland interceptor skiff. Twin turbine repulsors. Carbon fiber armor. Magnetic suspension. It handles the wastelands better than your dead rig. A fast skiff requires a capable pilot. I pilot my own ship, Kalen said. If I stay here, the Dredge labels me a coward. They look at me with pity. I refuse to die of shame in Sector 0. Mercer studied the shop owner. He saw a brittle pride, holding Kalen upright. A man stripped of his wife, his dignity, and his security needed motion to survive the psychological shock. Sitting still invited a total mental collapse. We take the interceptor, Mercer decided. But I dictate the cargo load. Agreed, Kalen said. He turned toward the reinforced rear exit. The skiff sits on the loading dock. Mercer followed Kalen through the heavy steel security door. The morning smog hung thick in the narrow alleyway. The air burned the back of Mercer's throat. The Outland interceptor skiff rested on the Ferretocrete loading dock. Matte silver chassis. Twin vector thrust turbines flanked the rear hull. Heavy-duty magnetic suspension coils supported the frame. It looked ready for a transcontinental rally. The pristine paint and unblemished heat shields revealed a pavement princess. The vehicle never left the paved grid of Sector 0. Kalen dropped the rear cargo ramp. The hold contained a mountain of survival gear. A massive white cryogenic preservation unit occupied a third of the deck. A heavy synthetic silk hab tent sat rolled beside the unit. A dual-burner plasma stove. 2 folding composite chairs. A plastic tote full of sanitized ration packs. Mercer grabbed the heavy handles of the cryogenic unit. He hauled the box toward the ledge. He dropped it off the dock. It hit the flooded alley with a massive splash. Coolant sprayed from the ruptured seal, mixing with the acid rain puddles. "What are you doing?" Kalen demanded. He pointed at the wreckage. "That holds purified ice and synthetic ribeyes. We track professional killers, Kalen. We do not host a terrace-level barbecue." Mercer grabbed the hab tent. He tossed it into the acid puddle. He discarded the plasma stove and the composite chairs into an overflowing municipal incinerator bin. "Stop!" Kalen yelled. He grabbed Mercer's arm. "We require supplies. We travel into the deep wastelands." Mercer shoved Kalen's hand away. "Weight kills speed. Speed catches the Drax brothers. Extra mass burns thermal cells and bogs the repulsors in soft ash. We carry emergency hydration, spare power cores, trauma kits, and kinetic ammunition. We leave the comfort items." Kalen stared at his discarded gear. He pointed a shaking finger at the ruined cryogenic cooler. "Lyra requires cold water. The desert heat makes her ill." "She occupies an armored cabin with mercenaries," Mercer said. "They offer 0 ice water. Adjust your reality." Mercer finished stripping the cargo hold down to a single crate of emergency rations, a high-lift magnetic jack, and a case of purified water. He slammed the ramp shut. "Show me your sidearm," Mercer ordered. Kalen hesitated. He reached under his canvas shirt. He pulled a hand cannon from his waistband. A .45 caliber pulse magnum. The polished chrome barrel caught the ambient neon light. Kalen held the weapon by the rubberized grip. His index finger rested inches from the hair trigger. "Do not point the emitter nozzle at the skiff," Mercer said. "The skiff represents our only ticket out of the dredge." Kalen lowered the heavy barrel toward the ferritocrete. Mercer held out his hand. "Give it to me." Kalen handed the heavy pistol to the bounty hunter. Mercer felt the weight. 3 pounds of high-density alloys. A hand cannon designed to punch through powered armor. He thumbed the magnetic release. The power cell dropped into his palm. He checked the charge. Full capacity. He slid the cell back into the grip until the mechanism clicked. He pushed the manual safety switch forward, locking the firing mechanism. He handed the weapon back to Kalen. "Keep the safety engaged," Mercer instructed. "You shove an active pulse weapon into your pants. You risk blowing your femoral artery open when the skiff hits a thermal pocket." Kalen shoved the weapon back into his waistband. He winced. The cold metal dug into his bruised abdomen. "I know how to aim," Kalen defended himself. "Aiming matters 0 when the target shoots back," Mercer said. "You experience a live firefight. Your fine motor skills evaporate. Your vision tunnels. You freeze. The Drax brothers thrive in that chaos. If we find them, you stay low. You keep your mouth shut. You let me execute the breach. You attempt to play the hero, you die." Kalen swallowed. The bruised skin on his face tightened. He looked at the heavy armor plating on the front of his skiff. He looked at the deep tire tracks leading out of the alley toward the western perimeter. "She carries my name," Kalen repeated. A fragile mantra holding his shattered mind together. "Get in the passenger seat," Mercer said. "I pilot." Kalen walked to the passenger side. He opened the gull-wing door and climbed into the synthetic leather seat. Proxy folded its limbs and compressed its chassis into the small jump seat behind the cockpit. Mercer took the yoke. He pressed the ignition sequence. The twin turbines roared to life. A clean, high-pitched hum replaced the silence of the alley. He engaged the repulsors. The skiff lifted off the ferritocrete, hovering 3 feet above the ground. He steered the vehicle out of the loading zone, gliding over the discarded hab tent. They floated down the flooded main avenue of Sector 0. The smog choked the empty street. Mercer accelerated past the Peacekeeper precinct, past the shattered analog shop, past the flickering neon signs. A few Dredge citizens stood on the cracked sidewalks, watching the silver skiff leave the grid. Nobody waved. Nobody offered a salute. They watched the vehicle shrink into the chemical haze, fully expecting the wastelands to swallow the men inside. Mercer checked the rear-view monitor one final time. The towering hab blocks of Sector 0 faded into a gray smudge on the horizon. He pressed the thrust lever forward. The interceptor surged ahead, chasing the heavy Mag-Lev tracks cut into the ash, following a ghost into the wasteland. Chapter 5. "Decrease the cabin climate control," Kalen demanded. He huddled against the passenger door of the Outland Interceptor. He wrapped his bruised arms across his chest. The digital display on the center console flashed 20 degrees Celsius. The exterior sensor registered 55 degrees of radioactive heat. "The cooling system runs at maximum," Mercer stated. He kept his hands locked on the steering yoke. "Heat fatigue degrades reaction times. We require sharp reflexes." "The frozen air aggregates my injuries," Kalen argued. His jaw shivered. The purple and black swelling around his eyes gave him the appearance of a ghoul caught in a spotlight. "I possess a specific sensitivity to sudden temperature drops. Adjust the louvers. Point the vents at the ceiling." Kalen reached out with trembling fingers. He slapped the plastic vent covers. He directed the frigid air away from his beaten face. He settled back into the synthetic leather seat. He winced. The dense material compressed his tender ribs. Mercer kept his hand pressed firm against the thrust lever. The twin turbines hummed a steady, high-pitched note. The speedometer needle hovered at 160 kilometers per hour. The interceptor pierced the outer perimeter of Sector 0. The towering hab blocks vanished behind them. The toxic smog fractured, giving way to a brutal, unfiltered sun. A desolate expanse of fused silica and irradiated sand stretched across the horizon. Heat mirages transformed the baked earth into a shimmering lake of liquid silver. Rusted skeletons of old-world transmission towers blurred past the side windows, a monotonous smear of oxidized iron against a bleached sky. "You dumped my cryogenic unit in a flooded alleyway," Kalen said. He stared out the permaglass window at the hostile landscape. "I packed purified water. I packed cold compresses." "The wastelands demand speed," Mercer said. 100 kilos of ice and molded polymer slows the magnetic suspension on rough terrain. We catch the Drax brothers by closing the distance. We do not organize a terrace-level picnic. Lyra requires cold water. Lyra occupies the armored rear cabin of a stolen Mag-Lev transport. She possesses delicate sensibilities, Kalen continued. He ignored the brutal reality. He picked at a loose thread on his canvas work shirt. "I found her in the orbital colonies. Elysium Station." She walked through life accustomed to automated valets and perfect atmospheric scrubbers. She utilized a specific rose silica hydrating mist. Custom order from a boutique on the promenade. It cost 200 credits a vial. She sprayed it on her face every morning to to combat the dry air down here. A woman from Elysium Station descends to the dredge, Mercer stated. He kept his eyes scanning the fused glass ahead. That constitutes a massive demographic anomaly. I provided stability, Kalen said. His voice took on a defensive, hard edge. I placed a targeted advertisement in a sub-ether data stream. Established merchant seeks refined companion. Stability and comfort guaranteed. She answered the beacon. She desired a quiet life. She desired a man possessing resources and a solid foundation. She desired your titanium vault. Kalen twisted in his seat. The magnetic restraint locked against his chest. You label her a thief. You label her a willing participant in this nightmare. You know nothing of my wife. I know augmented mercenaries like the Drax brothers, Mercer said. They execute precision strikes. They select targets holding maximum liquid assets with minimal security profiles. An analog merchant hoarding 80,000 hard credits beneath his floorboards represents the perfect mark. But they require inside knowledge to locate the trapdoor. I showed her the floorboards. Kalen yelled. His voice bounced off the acoustic permaglass of the cabin. I trusted her. A husband trusts his wife. We shared a living space. We shared meals. You bought a companion, Mercer said. You imported a woman from a major orbital installation. You placed her in a dying sector. You expected gratitude. I provided luxury. I ordered silk dresses from corporate catalogs. I installed a purified hydro shower. I bought a Steinway piano for the back room. She played it in the evenings. Classical sonatas. Did she play the piano, or did she measure the distance between the rear exit and the vault hinges? Kalen fell silent. He clenched his fists. His knuckles turned white against his kneecaps. He stared at the carbon fiber dashboard. The delusion fought a losing battle against the mounting evidence. The shattered security door. The melted titanium. The precise timing of the strike. Mercer tapped a sequence into the center console. A holographic display hums to life above the dashboard. A glowing red thermal ribbon snaked across a three-dimensional topographical grid. Thermal decay rate indicates a 2-hour lead, Proxy chirped from the rear jump seat. The Goliath-class repulsor coils leave a massive heat signature. The radioactive half-life of their ionized exhaust makes tracking trivial. Mercer studied the glowing red line. He reduced pressure on the thrust lever. The interceptor decelerated. The speedometer dropped to 100. 80. 60. Why halt the pursuit? Kalen asked. His panic returned. You stated we require speed. Mercer steered the skiff toward a massive dune of gray ash. The magnetic suspension whined, adjusting to the incline. The vehicle crested the dune and stopped. Mercer killed the forward thrust. The interceptor hovered motionless a meter above the ground. Mercer pointed at the holographic grid. Analyze the track, Mercer ordered. Kalen leaned closer. He squinted through his swollen eye. The red ribbon drifted right, crossing 2 grid sectors, then jerked back to the center vector in a sharp, jagged angle. The line wavers, Kalen noted. A 5-ton armored transport requires massive steering input to correct a drift of that magnitude, Mercer explained. The pilot fights the yoke. Lyra fights him, Kalen said. A desperate spark of hope ignited in his voice. She disrupts the driver. I told you she possesses a fierce spirit. She landed a solid strike on the smaller raider. She landed 1 strike during the initial breach, Mercer corrected. The big man neutralized her with a heavy physical blow. They secured her wrists with industrial mag cuffs. They threw her onto a synthetic leather bench. She lacks the leverage to fight a cyber-augmented mercenary operating a Goliath steering column. Explain the swerve. They feel safe, Mercer said. They believe they executed a clean extraction. They put 50 kilometers between their exhaust ports and your ruined shop. They relax. They divert attention from the driving vector. They reach for synthetic stimulants. They check a topographical map. They lose focus. Mercer engaged the thrusters. The skiff surged forward, sliding down the far side of the ash dune. The repulsors kicked up a cloud of gray dust. The bounty hunter presents a 94% probability of accuracy, Proxy interjected. The android's amber eye tracked the passing ruins. The tactical precision of the breach contradicts a random hostile encounter. Inside knowledge remains the primary variable in this equation. Deactivate your vocal synthesizer, Kalen snapped at the machine. Proxy complied. The amber eye dimmed. Kalen stared at his reflection in the side mirror. He touched the purple skin under his eye. She complained about the recycled oxygen, Kalen murmured. He spoke to the perma-glass. Every evening. She claimed the synthetic air damaged her pores. I purchased an expensive micro-humidifier for the living quarters. I sealed the perma-glass joints with industrial silicone. I attempted to construct a fortress against the dredge. You built a terrarium, Mercer said. I protected an investment. A human requires more than sealed windows and purified ice. They require a reason to stay. Kalen turned his head. His gaze snapped to Mercer. Anger flared, overriding the pain. You possess zero right to judge my marriage. You drift through the sectors hunting bounties. You judge my life from the outside. I judge the evidence, Mercer said. The evidence states a professional raiding crew knew the exact layout details of your property. The evidence states your wife orchestrated her own extraction. You lie. Kalen slammed his fist against the carbon fiber dashboard. The reinforced material absorbed the impact. She screamed my name. She screamed for a rescue. A performance for the Hablock neighbors, Mercer said. His voice remained a calm, flat line against Kalen's hysteria. She provided the dredge with a show. An abduction narrative. It buys the Drax brothers a head start. It prevents the sector peacekeepers from asking questions about the missing credits until the Mag-Lev crosses the perimeter grid. Stop talking. Kalen covered his ears with his bruised hands. Stop poisoning my mind. I prepare your mind, Mercer said. You face Mick Drax, you need absolute clarity. You harbor delusions of a rescue mission, you hesitate. You hesitate. Mick Drax puts a plasma bolt through your frontal lobe. You die bleeding on the irradiated sand, while your wife counts your hard credits in the passenger seat. Kalen squeezed his eyes shut. A single tear escaped, cutting a clean track through the dust on his cheek. He lowered his hands. He stared at the digital chronometer on the dashboard. The numbers flipped to 1414. Mercer spotted a change in the topography ahead. The flat expanse of fused silica shattered. Deep canyons of rusted metal rose from the desert floor. The graveyard of old-world naval vessels and discarded orbital platforms formed a jagged, rust-colored mountain range. Mercer glanced at the holographic tracking display. The glowing red thermal ribbon altered course. It abandoned the primary western vector. It cut a sharp angle toward the labyrinth of rusted metal. The Mag-Lev altered course, Mercer announced. He pointed to the hologram. The red line ended at a cluster of faint ambient heat signatures hidden deep within the metal canyons. Proxy reactivated its vocal synthesizer. A refueling station occupies those coordinates. A remote outpost catering to nomadic scavengers and deep waste prospectors. Mercer slowed the interceptor. He studied the towering walls of oxidized iron ahead. They abandoned the open desert, Mercer said. He steered the skiff into the shadow of a massive, decaying starship hull. The repulsors hummed against the metal walls. The hunt shifted from a high-speed chase into a tactical tracking operation. The rusted maze closed around them, hiding the monsters waiting at the end of the thermal trail. Chapter 6. Look at the sky, Kalen said. He pointed a bruised finger through the permaglass windshield. A column of black dots circled a fixed point high above the jagged metal canyon. They caught the thermal updrafts, riding the invisible currents with lazy, effortless grace. Scavenger drones, Mercer said. He kept his grip firm on the steering yoke, guiding the skiff through a narrow gap between two fallen dreadnought hulls. They smelled decaying biological matter from 3 kilometers out. They wait for the heat to cook the meat. They circle directly over the thermal track. They circle a fresh kill. The skiff crested a rise of compacted rust. A shallow valley opened below them. A solitary structure occupied the dead center of the depression. A pressurized dome, constructed from salvaged starship plating. 2 ancient plasma feed pumps stood like silent sentinels beneath a sun-faded carbon canopy. The painted sign above the pumps peeled in long strips, Canyon Edge Fuel and Cell. The glowing red thermal track led straight into the hard-packed ash lot. The heavy repulsor grooves cut deep, scattering loose irradiated gravel. Mercer braked. The interceptor came to a halt 20 meters from the pump island. He threw the thruster control into neutral. The turbines idled, a low, steady thrum against the absolute silence of the metal graveyard. Stay in the synthetic leather, Mercer ordered. Keep your fingers wrapped around the grip of that pulse magnum. Kalen swallowed hard. His hand hovered over the heavy weapon shoved into his waistband. You expect a trap? I expect the worst variation of any given scenario. Mercer opened his gull-wing door. The pulse pistol cleared the thigh holster before his boots touched the ash. He kept the weapon indexed near his chest, emitter nozzle angled toward the ground. He stalked toward the pressurized dome. The desert heat radiated off the ferritocrete apron, baking the air into a shimmering distortion. The primary airlock door of the station hung open. A heavy permaglass pane, shattered inward, littered the cracked linoleum floorboards. Mercer sliced the pie from the doorframe. He cleared the left corner. Empty shelving units. He cleared the right. A checkout counter covered in spilled synthetic protein bars and broken data chips. He stepped over the threshold. The smell hit his olfactory sensors like a physical blow. Coagulated blood mixed with scorched ozone and raw sugar. A commercial CAF brewer sat on a back counter. The glass pot sat empty. The thermal element glowed orange, baking the dark residue into a thick, smoking tar. The attendant occupied a square polymer table in the center of the room. He wore a faded canvas work shirt and grease-stained trousers. He rested his face against a paper plate, holding half-eaten synthetic eggs and refried beans. A thick pool of dark crimson covered the white table surface, dripping a metronomic rhythm onto the floor tiles. Proxy stepped over the threshold behind Mercer. The android's amber eye scanned the room, casting a golden grid over the corpse. Time of death calculates to 114 minutes prior to our arrival, Proxy stated. The tungsten slug entered the occipital bone at a velocity exceeding Mach 4. Immediate cessation of neural activity. 0 pain registered. The mess dictates otherwise, Mercer grunted. Mercer approached the table. He kept his head on a swivel, checking the rear hallway and the open door leading behind the counter. A single entry wound marked the back of the attendant's skull. Point-blank range. Scorched flesh tattooed the gray hair around the hole. A hyper-velocity execution. A railgun signature. The exit wound destroyed the man's facial structure, burying tungsten fragments and bone splinters into the plate of food. A melted pulse shotgun lay on the linoleum near the man's right hand. A worn synthetic strap dangled from the stock. The thermal coils glowed a faint dying red. One spent plasma cell sat ejected on the floor. The smell of burnt sulfur lingered in the stagnant greenhouse air of the station. The raiders trashed the retail space. They swept rows of canned nutrient paste off the shelves. They sliced open 50-kilo bags of flour and sugar, coating the room in a thick white powder. A permaglass display case containing cheap vibro blades and thumb igniters lay smashed, emptied of inventory. They shattered a rack of synthetic lubricant bottles, creating a slick, rainbow-colored hazard across the center aisle. Senseless, theatrical violence. A message left for anyone tracking the path. They operated with specific, ruthless cruelty. They wanted the sector to know they passed through. They wanted the sector to fear the wake. Footsteps crunched on the broken glass at the front entrance. Mercer spun, bringing the pulse pistol up to eye level. The illuminated, targeting reticle aligned. Kalen stood in the doorway. He stared at the dead man at the polymer table. All color drained from Kalen's face, matching the white flour coating the floorboards. His bruised, swollen eyes went wide. "I instructed you to remain in the skiff," Mercer said. He lowered the weapon. Kalen ignored the command. He covered his mouth with a trembling hand. He staggered backward, catching himself on the aluminum doorframe. He dry heaved, his chest racking with violent spasms. "They murdered him," Kalen choked out. "They executed him over a plate of synthetic eggs." "He fought back," Mercer said. He pointed the black nozzle of his pistol at the melted pulse shotgun on the floor. The attendant fired a plasma burst. He hit a target. The Drax brothers retaliated with lethal force. Kalen dragged his gaze away from the corpse. He looked at the destroyed shelves. He looked at the pools of synthetic lubricant. Lyra witnessed this slaughter. They forced her to watch them put a tungsten slug into an old man's brain. "Step outside," Mercer said. "Check your corners. Wait by the interceptor." Mercer bypassed the front counter. He pushed through a swinging metal door leading to the rear lot. The rusted hinges shrieked. The black Mag-Lev Goliath transport sat parked behind the pressurized dome. Steam hissed from a punctured front repulsor coil. A pool of blue ionized fluid soaked into the parched earth beneath the armored chassis. The transport absorbed massive damage. A tight cluster of heavy plasma burns peppered the rear passenger side quarter panel. The superheated bolts shredded the carbon composite armor. One errant blast shattered the rear permaglass window, creating a spiderweb of broken safety material. The front port-side magnetic suspension unit sat dead. Melted circuitry wrapped around a gouged, ruined alloy housing. "The attendant caught them by surprise," Mercer noted, speaking to the empty lot. He stepped out the back door and pulled the trigger. He disabled their primary transport. Mercer walked to the Mag-Lev. He looked through the shattered rear window. The black synthetic leather bench seat sat empty. Glass fragments covered the upholstery. Mercer opened the rear passenger door. The heat inside the armored cabin felt oppressive. The air smelled of cheap chemical stimulants, stale smoke, and nervous sweat. He inspected the floorboards. He found a severed neural link cable resting on the carpeted floor mat. Mercer picked it up. He examined the fiber optic structure. The thick cable separated into two distinct pieces. Kalen rounded the corner of the building. He refused to wait by the skiff. He spotted Mercer holding the severed cable. "She cut herself loose," Kalen said. A desperate, ragged smile touched his bruised lips. "I told you she fights." She located a piece of broken permaglass and severed the electronic binding. "Permaglass requires a distinct sawing motion," Mercer said. Permaglass creates jagged, uneven, frayed cuts in high-density fiber optics. Examine the edges. Mercer held the two ends of the neural link cable up to the harsh sunlight. Kalen squinted. The cut looked straight. A clean surgical slice. A focused thermal blade created this separation, Mercer explained. A high-heat scalpel pressing down against a solid surface. Someone cut her loose. Someone possessing a powered blade and the freedom to use it. They needed her to walk, Kalen rationalized. He pointed at the ruined repulsor coil of the Mag-Lev. The transport died. They forced her to exit the vehicle. They cut the bindings to march her into the wastelands. Mercer dropped the sliced cable into the radioactive dirt. He turned his attention to a corrugated steel hanger sitting adjacent to the main dome. A heavy magnetic security lock lay on the gravel, melted in half by a plasma torch. The metal double doors swung open, groaning on oxidized hinges. Mercer stalked inside the dark structure. The hangar smelled of heavy machine oil, aviation fuel, and old canvas tarps. Heavy wooden tool benches lined the side walls. A commercial air compressor, an arc welder, and a stack of spare repulsor coils sat idle in the corners. Two large rectangular patches of clean ferritocrete marked the center of the floor, surrounded by years of accumulated grease, dirt, and chemical spills. They traded vehicles, Mercer said. He walked back out into the blinding sun. He studied the repulsor trails, leaving the ferritocrete apron of the hangar. He dropped to one knee, tracking the disturbed ash. Two distinct thrust patterns, Mercer said. He pointed to the dual, parallel scorch marks biting into the desert soil. Lighter, agile vehicles. Probably a pair of sky skiffs. Outland models. Stripped-down frames, overclocked engines. The attendant kept his scout flyers locked secure in the shed. The Drax brothers commandeered them. They split up. Kalen asked. He stared at the twin sets of tracks heading west toward the jagged metal canyons. They divide the target profile, Mercer said. Two smaller, faster flyers navigate the rough backcountry terrain better than a heavy, disabled, full-size Mag-Lev. They cover more ground. They complicate any organized pursuit. They force the hunter to choose a path. Kalen walked to the edge of the lot. He stared at the scorch marks. The delusion continued to warp his perception of reality. He needed to find evidence of a struggle. He needed to find a sign of resistance. Lyra, Kalen murmured. Which skiff carries my wife? The tracks run parallel for 100 meters, Mercer observed, tracking the burned lines out toward a dry riverbed. Then they diverge. One set heads northwest toward the high orbital debris fields. The other set cuts west into the salt flats. We must choose the correct path. Mercer stood up. He brushed the fine white ash from his canvas duster. He looked at the disabled Mag-Lev. He looked at the open rear door. He looked back at the pressurized dome, holding the executed attendant. The Drax brothers murdered an old man over a pair of scout flyers. They left a bloody footprint in the center of the metal graveyard. They operated with absolute impunity. We check the perimeter first, Mercer said. Men confident in their escape leave careless signs. We locate the staging area. We figure out how your wife entered that second vehicle. Mercer gripped the pulse pistol. He moved away from the hangar, circling the perimeter of the dirt lot, hunting for the truth hidden in the shifting ash. Chapter 7. Look at the dust. Mercer stood beneath a rusted carbon fiber overhang, extending from the rear wall of the pressurized dome. The metal roof provided a 10-meter square of deep, bruised shadow against the blinding wasteland glare. Kalen stepped out of the harsh sunlight. He favored his right side. He held his ribs. He breathed through his mouth, pulling the arid air into his lungs in shallow, rattling gasps. The heat cooked the bruised flesh around his eyes, turning the purple skin angry and tight. "I see an ash floor," Kalen said. "You look at the surface," Mercer said. "You need to read the impact." Mercer pointed the emitter nozzle of the pulse pistol toward the center of the shaded patch. Two cheap composite lounge chairs sat angled toward the vast expanse of the salt flats. Sun-faded synthetic webbing crisscrossed the alloy frames. The webbing sagged, stretched by recent heavy weight. Between the two chairs sat a repurposed coolant drum, functioning as a crude patio table. Mercer holstered the pistol. He crouched. He brought his face inches from the packed earth. 3 synthetic nicotine stubs littered the dirt near the left chair. Crushed white filter tips. Mercer hovered his hand over the stubs, feeling for residual thermal energy. The paper felt cold. Dead. He shifted his gaze to the right chair. A single, thick cigarillo stub sat ground into the dust. The dark brown synthetic tobacco leaf unspooled at the crushed end. Resting on top of the coolant drum sat a foil wrapper. Silver foil. A torn package for a high-grade nutrient bar. Tiny black wasteland ants swarmed the sugary residue, dismantling the remaining synthetic proteins cell by cell. "They consumed a snack," Kalen said. He leaned against a heavy steel beam resting near the wall. He wiped a thick bead of sweat from his forehead. "Criminals experience hunger. They pillaged the station inventory. They stole a ration bar. Criminals running from a homicide experience adrenaline," Mercer countered. "Adrenaline suppresses the appetite. It shuts down the digestive tract. You execute a man with a railgun. Your heart rate spikes to 150 beats a minute. You grab the keys to the fresh skiffs. You load your gear. You engage the thrusters." Mercer stood. He approached the coolant drum. He stared at the foil wrapper. "Consuming a nutrient bar requires time," Mercer continued. "It requires 5 to 8 minutes of idle chewing. You sit in a chair. You look at the horizon. You chew the synthetic protein." They felt secure. They felt invincible. The big man, Drax, sat in this right chair. He smoked the heavy cigarillo. He crushed it under his boot heel. Mercer pointed at a deep, square impression in the dirt beneath the right chair. "He possesses massive bulk." The composite frame bent outward under his mass. The brother sat in the left chair. "The brother paced," Mercer said. He gestured to a chaotic pattern of overlapping boot prints behind the left chair. "Jesse Drax holds the nervous energy. He smoked 3 nicotine sticks in 10 minutes. He refused to sit. He stood behind the empty chair, watching the back trail, waiting for the exhaust cloud of a sector peacekeeper." Kalen stared at the empty left chair. The synthetic webbing dipped low in the center. The dust coating the alloy armrests showed distinct clean handprints. "Someone occupied that seat," Kalen said. His voice dropped an octave, scraping against his parched throat. "A third party sat in the left chair," Mercer agreed. Mercer walked back out into the direct sunlight. He returned to the spot near the disabled Mag-Lev, where he found the severed neural link cable. He dropped to one knee. He placed his index finger on the edge of a distinct footprint in the loose gravel. Square toe. Heavy cybernetic lug sole. Drax, Mercer identified the track. He moved his hand 20 centimeters to the right. Narrower sole. Worn heel. Jesse Drax. He moved his hand 30 centimeters forward. Pointed toe, Mercer said. A 5-centimeter stacked heel. A smooth synthetic leather sole, lacking aggressive tread. High-end designer footwear. A boot built for Elysium station promenades, not irradiated hardpan. Kalen left the shade of the overhang. He walked to Mercer's side. He stared down at the delicate, sharp impression cut into the dirt. "Lyra," Kalen whispered. We establish her starting point, Mercer said. He stood up. He kept his eyes locked on the trail of pointed-toe footprints. She exited the armored transport. The severed cable fell to the floorboards. She stepped onto the gravel. Mercer began a physical demonstration. He moved with deliberate steps, placing his combat boots parallel to the track of the pointed heels. He narrated the geometry of the stride. Analyze the distance between the heel strikes, Mercer instructed. 50 centimeters. Consistent. Rhythmic. Analyze the depth of the impression. Kalen followed. He stared at the dirt. He tried to comprehend the mechanical data, fighting the emotional wall building in his chest. The prints look even. A hostage under extreme duress breaks the pattern, Mercer explained. A hostage resists forward momentum. A terrified victim leans backward, fighting the pull of their captor. That resistance forces the heel to strike hard and drag through the soil. It plows the dirt forward, creating a ridge at the toe. The stride length shortens to 30 centimeters. It becomes a shuffle, a struggle. Mercer stopped. He pointed at the clean, undisturbed edges of the pointed footprint. Look at this heel strike, Mercer said. Clean entry. Clean exit. The weight transfers smooth from the heel to the ball of the foot. The toe lifts without dragging a single pebble. This represents a casual stroll. A voluntary walk across an ash lot. Kalen shook his head. They held a weapon on her. A pulse pistol pressed to her spine forces a person to walk straight. A weapon to the spine induces a rigid, terrified gait. It creates uneven pressure. It creates a stumble. The human nervous system betrays the fear. Mercer resumed his path. He followed the tracks away from the Mag-Lev. The path cut a straight, efficient line toward the corrugated steel hangar. It bypassed the chaotic, pacing tracks of Jesse Drax. It bypassed the heavy, wide-stance tracks of Mick Drax. The delicate footprints led straight into the shaded overhang. They ended at the left composite lounge chair. She walked from the transport to the shade, Mercer stated the undeniable fact. She sat down. She placed her hands on the armrests. Mercer pointed at the foil wrapper resting on the coolant drum. She ate the nutrient bar, Mercer said. Kalen stared at the silver foil. The ants swarmed the sugary residue. The reality of the scene assaulted Kalen's core beliefs. His wife did not exist as a victim in this space. She existed as a participant. She sat in a chair 15 meters from a murdered man, consumed a synthetic snack, and enjoyed the shade. You build a narrative out of ash, Kalen said. His voice cracked, fracturing under the strain. You arrange random details to fit a cynical worldview. She grabbed the bar from the station shelves to survive. She required sustenance. I build a narrative out of physics, Mercer corrected. Physics lacks emotion. Physics lacks an agenda. The dirt records the exact truth of the applied pressure. Proxy joined them under the overhang. The android processed the scene. The bounty hunter provides accurate analysis, Proxy chirped. The lack of elevated cortisol markers in the stride pattern confirms a zero-threat environment for the subject. Shut your vocal synthesizer down, Kalen barked. Proxy went silent. The amber eye blinked. Mercer turned away from the chairs. He tracked the departure path. The pointed-toe footprints left the shaded overhang. They joined the heavy, square-toed prints of Mick Drax. The two sets of tracks walked in parallel. The distance between the two individuals measured less than 40 centimeters. A tight, intimate formation. Mercer followed the dual path toward the open doors of the steel hangar. The tracks exited the hangar. They approached the two sets of fresh repulsor scorch marks left by the stolen sky skiffs. Mercer analyzed the fresh burn patterns. One skiff runs a short chassis, narrow track width, a stripped-down scout model. The second skiff runs a wider stance, heavier curb weight, a dual turbine hauler. The footprints separated. The worn heels of Jesse Drax approached the driver's side door of the scout model. The track ended where he climbed behind the yoke. The square-toed boots of Mick Drax approached the pilot door of the heavy hauler skiff. The pointed heels of Lyra Vane approached the passenger side door of the heavy hauler skiff. Mercer stopped at the passenger side scorch mark. He pointed at the ground. "Look at the final impression," Mercer ordered. Kalen approached the burn track. He stared at the ash. The pointed toe footprints stopped parallel to the deep repulsor grooves. Two distinct, deep heel strikes marked the spot where the person stood facing the armored door panel. "She stood here," Mercer said. She opened the heavy composite door. She stepped up onto the repulsor strut. Zero scuff marks. Zero sign of a man lifting her against her will. Zero sign of a struggle to force her inside the cabin. Kalen stared at the two final heel strikes. The dirt provided zero room for interpretation. The physical evidence dismantled the abduction theory piece by piece. She severed her own bindings. She walked voluntary to the shade. She ate. She walked voluntary to the stolen skiff. She climbed into the shotgun seat. She sat passenger, Mercer stated. Mick Drax took the yoke. Jesse Drax took the lead in the scout flyer. Kalen reached into the breast pocket of his canvas work shirt. He pulled out the holographic projector. His calloused, bruised fingers gripped the cold metal casing. He pressed the activation stud. The three-dimensional portrait flickered into the harsh sunlight. The dark hair, the striking eyes, the calculated smile. He stared at the image, searching for the terrified victim he conjured in his mind. The woman in the hologram offered zero comfort. The woman in the hologram looked ready to climb into a stolen Outland interceptor and leave Sector Zero burning in the rearview monitor. "She required the climate control," Kalen whispered. The sentence sounded hollow. A pathetic defense mechanism collapsing under its own weight. The heavy hauler possesses a stronger atmospheric scrubber than the open-air scout. Mick Drax placed her there for her comfort. Mercer looked at the man. Kalen gripped the projector tight enough to crack the casing. The merchant preferred the illusion. The truth required him to acknowledge his status as a target, a fool, and a bankroll. "Put the projector away, Kalen." Kalen slipped the device back into his pocket. He kept his hand pressed against his chest, shielding the electronics from the harsh desert reality. "We followed the heavy hauler," Kalen said. Anger began to replace the panic in his voice. A dark, jagged edge sharpened his tone. "We follow the deep scorch marks." "The tracks diverge 3 kilometers past the station," Mercer reminded him. "They force us to choose. We choose the hauler. Mick Drax possesses the credits. Mick Drax possesses my wife." Mercer walked back toward the idling interceptor. The hauler carries more mass. 2 passengers. The stolen hard credits. The heavy breaching tools. The magnetic suspension sits lower. The repulsors burn deeper into the sand. We track the heavier burn pattern. Kalen followed. He walked past the dead attendant inside the dome. He walked past the disabled Mag-Lev. He kept his eyes locked on the passenger door of the silver interceptor. He climbed inside. He slammed the gull-wing door shut, sealing himself inside the frigid, artificial climate of the cabin. Mercer took the yoke. He shifted the thrusters into drive. He steered the skiff out of the ash lot, bypassing the shattered permaglass and the pooling ionized fluid. He lined the hood up with the deep, aggressive scorch marks of the stolen hauler. He engaged the primary turbines. The skiff surged forward, leaving the canyon edge station behind. The pursuit entered the deep wastelands. The salt flats stretched ahead, a blinding white expanse of fused silica and alkali dust. The heat mirages danced on the horizon, swallowing the repulsor tracks in a pool of liquid distortion. Mercer tightened his grip on the steering yoke. The real hunt started now. They abandoned the paved grid. They abandoned the laws of the sectors. They flew straight into the brutal, unforgiving heart of the dead world, chasing a killer and a willing accomplice into the sun. Chapter 8. The scent of crushed synthetic rose petals and manufactured sandalwood choked the confined cabin of the Interceptor. The heavy floral notes overpowered the smell of scorched ozone, hot polymer, and copper blood. Kalen held a square of white silk across his face. He breathed through the fabric. His bruised knuckles gripped the material. He kept his eyes squeezed shut. The purple flesh around his orbital bones darkened in color, turning a necrotic black in the harsh sunlight piercing the permaglass windshield. Mercer steered the skiff down a steep, rock-strewn incline. The heavy magnetic suspension absorbed the punishment. The repulsor coils whined, fighting the elevation drop and the loose irradiated gravel. A jutting blade of fused silica scraped the carbon fiber undercarriage. The metal shrieked, a sound like a dentist's drill magnified 100 times. Kalen flinched. He lowered the silk scarf. The fabric clung to the dried blood on his split lip. "Halt the transport," Kalen demanded. His voice sounded like cracked permaglass grinding together. My cranium pounds. The horizon spins. I need to close my eyes. "You close your eyes, you invite the clinical shock to take command," Mercer said. He kept both hands on the steering yoke, guiding the agile craft over a deep washout trench. "We lose the sun in 3 hours. The shadows lengthen. The thermal winds pick up at dusk. They blow the loose ash across the hardpan and erase the scorch marks. We halt the skiff, we lose the trail." "I hold her scent," Kalen said. He held the scarf up to the dashboard vents. The rushing cold air caught the fabric, billowing it out like a surrender flag. Custom botanical blend. 200 credits an ounce from a promenade boutique on Elysium Station. She leaves a signature in the atmosphere. "The thermal winds scattered that signature hours ago," Mercer said. "I remember her neck," Kalen continued. He slipped deeper into the manic fatigue. He stared at the digital chronometer, but his eyes focused on a point 1,000,000 kilometers away. She sprayed the silica right behind her earlobes. "I bought her the vial for our anniversary. 6 months. I handed her the wrapped carbon box. She smiled. She wore this scarf the next morning. A silk scarf offers 0 protection against a high-velocity plasma bolt, Kalen. Put the fabric in your pocket. Consume a ration of purified water. You operate without a soul," Kalen spat. He jammed the silk into his trousers. He grabbed the polished metal holographic projector from his shirt pocket, rubbing his thumb over the activation stud. "You view human beings as data points. Scorch marks. Footprints. Spent power cells. You lack the capacity to understand affection." "I understand survival," Mercer said. "Affection slows the reflexes. Affection makes a man charge a fortified position with an empty kinetic shotgun. Keep your eyes on the terrain." The incline leveled out. The Interceptor glided into a massive, sun-baked depression. A dry chemical lake bed. Decades ago, toxic runoff from the northern manufacturing grids pooled here. Now, the earth resembled a shattered mosaic of baked white clay. A network of deep, geometric cracks stretched across the basin floor, glowing like bleached bone under the brutal sun. A single, petrified carbon tree stood dead in the center of the dry lake. Its bare black branches reached toward the sky like skeletal fingers. Mercer eased the pressure off the thrust lever. The skiff crawled to a halt at the edge of the cracked clay. The heavy repulsor scorch marks of the stolen hauler led straight into the depression. The intense heat from the dual turbines crushed the raised edges of the baked mud, leaving a clear, undeniable path. The tracks stopped halfway across the basin, right next to the dead carbon tree. A chaotic jumble of overlapping burns marked a spot where the pilot killed the forward momentum. They halted their flight, Mercer said. He shifted the thrusters to idle and engaged the parking anchors. The hostile subjects maintained a stationary position for 11 minutes, Proxy reported from the jump seat. The android processed the depth of the thermal scarring on the clay. The timeline aligns with standard biological relief intervals. The sudden silence deafened them. The high-pitched whine of the primary turbines vanished, replaced by the absolute crushing stillness of the deep wastelands. The heat radiating off the white clay distorted the horizon. Mercer unclasped his magnetic safety harness. He pushed the heavy gull-wing door open and stepped into the furnace. The heat sucked the moisture from his ocular sensors in seconds. He pulled a pair of polarized aviator frames from his duster pocket. He slid the dark lenses over his eyes. He drew the pulse pistol, keeping the emitter nozzle pointed at the cracked earth. He walked toward the center of the basin. Kalen stayed in the skiff. He watched through the bug-splattered permaglass. Mercer reached the dead carbon tree. He stood next to the deep impressions left by the hauler's repulsor struts. He read the story, printed in the chemical clay. The baked mud acted like casting polymer. It recorded every shift in weight, every footstep, every minor adjustment of balance. Mercer examined the pilot-side tracks. Drax stepped out of the heavy vehicle. The square-toed cybernetic boots crushed a large slab of clay. The tracks walked around the front chassis, paused, and approached the trunk of the dead tree. A dark, damp patch stained the white dirt at the base of the trunk. Mick relieved himself. He ground another synthetic cigarillo stub into the earth with his heavy heel. Mercer walked around to the passenger side of the skiff tracks. He found the pointed heels. The impressions sat deep and perfect in the clay. Lyra opened the armored passenger door. She stepped down from the repulsor strut. Mercer turned back toward the silver interceptor. He raised his left hand. He signaled Kalen to exit the vehicle. Kalen shook his head. He refused to open the door. He clutched the metal holographic projector to his chest. Mercer walked back to the skiff. He yanked the passenger door open. The blast of artificial cold air hit his face, a sharp contrast to the apocalyptic heat outside. Exit the vehicle, Kalen. I need to rest. My ribs burn. You need to face the facts, Mercer said. He reached into the cabin. He grabbed the collar of Kalen's canvas work shirt. He hauled the merchant out of the synthetic leather seat. Kalen stumbled. His boots hit the irradiated gravel. He gasped in pain, clutching his side. He glared at Mercer. A flash of pure hatred cut through the exhaustion. Walk with me, Mercer ordered. He led the shop owner across the cracked basin. The sun beat down on their shoulders. A physical weight pressed them into the dirt. They reached the passenger side burn marks. Mercer pointed the black barrel of his pistol at the ground. Look at the clay, Mercer said. Kalen stared down. He saw the twin indentations of the pointed heels. The smooth synthetic leather soles left unblemished outlines. She stepped out of the cabin, Kalen said. His voice trembled. He searched for an excuse. The climate control in that stolen hauler failed. She required unfiltered oxygen. She required a stretch, Mercer corrected. Follow the path. Mercer traced the footprints with the muzzle of his weapon. The pointed heels walked a straight, even line away from the vehicle. They bypassed the dead carbon tree. They walked toward a small ridge of fused glass overlooking a deep, jagged canyon. A terrified hostage stays near the transport, Mercer lectured. A terrified hostage curls into a defensive posture. A hostage cowers. A hostage begs for mercy. A hostage avoids taking a nature walk to admire the canyon view. Kalen followed the trail. His breathing grew shallow. He stopped at the edge of the glass ridge. The pointed footprints stood side by side at the precipice. The impressions showed equal weight distribution. She stood right here, Mercer said. He stepped up behind the merchant. She placed her hands on her hips. She looked down into the canyon. The heels dug deep into the dust. She shifted her weight backward, relaxing her spine. She took a break from the flight. Mick forced her to walk. Mick stood by the tree, Mercer said. He pointed back to the dark stain and the crushed cigarillo. He stood 12 meters away from her. He presented his back to her. He unsealed his trousers and relieved himself. He left her completely unsupervised. Kalen stared down into the canyon. The jagged metal spikes dropped 200 meters into a dry riverbed. She contemplated jumping, Kalen whispered. He grasped at a phantom thread of hope. She stood at the edge, weighing death against captivity. She chose life to return to me. Mercer reached into his duster pocket. He pulled out a crumpled, silver plastic object. He held it out on his open palm. Kalen looked at the object. A silver, polymer cap. The top to a premium brand of hydrating rose silica mist. I found this near the passenger door, Mercer said. Pressed into the clay. Kalen stared at the cap. The blood drained from his face. His skin adopted the color of old parchment. She brought her luggage, Mercer stated. He drove the final nail into the coffin of Kalen's delusion. The Drax brothers initiated a violent, high-speed kinetic breach. They tore the front off your building. They burned your titanium vault. They dragged your wife into the acid rain wearing a silk robe. Yet, she managed to pack her custom boutique facial spray. Kalen snatched the silver cap from Mercer's hand. He turned it over in his trembling fingers. He recognized the shape. He recognized the ribbed texture. He paid for the shipment from Elysium Station every month. She packed a bag, Kalen said. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. A coordinated departure, Mercer confirmed. She played the screaming victim for the Hab-block neighbors. Once the Mag-Lev cleared the sector limits, she opened her overnight bag and freshened her synthetic makeup. Kalen dropped to his knees. The sharp edges of the baked clay bit into his trousers. He let the silver cap fall to the dirt. He pulled the holographic projector from his pocket. He pressed the activation stud. He stared at the face projected in the light. The calculated smile mocked him in the blinding sun. He raised his arm. He prepared to smash the projector against the fused glass rock. Mercer stepped forward. He grabbed Kalen's wrist. He stopped the downward arc. Do not break the device, Mercer ordered. Kalen fought the grip. Let me shatter it. She played me for a fool. She stole my credits and left me for an augmented monster. You break the machine, you surrender, Mercer said. His grip resembled a titanium vice tightening around the merchant's bones. You break the machine, the reality breaks you. You use the anger. You forge the betrayal into a weapon. You let the rage fuel the pursuit. She desires zero contact with me. She desires your 80,000 hard credits, Mercer corrected. Mick Drax possesses the heavy artillery. Mick Drax possesses the mercenary network. But your wife possesses the intellect. She orchestrated the breach. She holds the strings. Mercer released Kalen's wrist. He took a step back. He holstered his weapon. Get off your knees, Mercer said. Stand up. We retain 3 hours of daylight. The hauler tracks cut north from this basin. We engage the thrusters, and we run them down. Kalen stayed on the ground for a long moment. He stared at the silver cap resting in the dust next to the flawless pointed footprint. He looked at the hologram in his hand. The fragile, delicate woman he invented in his mind vanished. A cold, calculating stranger replaced her. A stranger who drank his purified water and measured the dimensions of his hidden trapdoor. He deactivated the projector. He slipped the metal cylinder back into his shirt pocket. He pushed himself off the cracked earth. He ignored the burning pain in his ribs. A new sensation replaced the panic and the despair. A cold, heavy stone settled in his gut. Pure, unfiltered rage. Kalen turned his back on the canyon. He walked straight toward the silver interceptor. He avoided looking at the tracks again. He opened the passenger door. He climbed inside. He pulled the heavy gull-wing door shut behind him. Mercer watched the merchant. He recognized the shift in the man's posture. The desperate husband died on the baked clay of the dry chemical lake. Something harder, something dangerous took his place. Mercer walked back to the pilot's side. He climbed into the cabin. He engaged the ignition sequence. The twin turbines roared to life, shattering the silence of the basin. He pushed the thrust lever forward. The repulsors gripped the clay. The magnetic coils crushed the pointed footprints into dust as they glided forward, chasing the stolen hauler deep into the jagged heart of the wastelands. Chapter 9. The Outland Interceptor devoured the salt flats. The twin turbines screamed a high-pitched note, a mechanical predator chasing a scent across the dead earth. The bleached white clay gave way to jagged fields of obsidian glass and crumbling basalt. Inside the cabin, Kalen sat in absolute silence. He stared through the bug-splattered permaglass. He kept his hands resting on his knees. He gripped the heavy .45 caliber pulse magnum. He kept the safety engaged, but his thumb traced the textured release switch over and over, wearing a groove into his calloused skin. The desperate merchant died on the edge of the canyon. A cold, empty vessel rode in the passenger seat. Proxy broke the silence from the rear jump seat. Thermal anomaly detected, the android chirped. The amber optical sensor pulsed a bright, rhythmic gold in the shadows of the cabin. A massive heat bloom registers 5 kilometers ahead. The signature contradicts the exhaust profile of the stolen hauler. Mercer checked the holographic, topographical display. A jagged red circle pulsed on the grid, blocking the narrow pass between two towering mesas of rusted iron ore. Define the contradiction, Mercer ordered. The stolen hauler utilizes focused ionized plasma for propulsion, Proxy explained. The resulting heat signature creates a tight, linear trail. This anomaly presents a chaotic, expanding sphere of thermal energy. It indicates an uncontrolled combustion event. A fire. Mercer pushed the thrust lever forward. The skiff surged, the magnetic suspension eating the impact of the broken basalt. They rounded the base of the left mesa. A thick pillar of oily black smoke stained the bleached sky. The smoke originated from the center of the narrow pass. Mercer eased the pressure off the turbines. The skiff decelerated. He killed the active repulsors and engaged the stealth hover mode. The loud whine dropped to a low subsonic hum. They drifted forward, using a massive boulder of oxidized iron for cover. Mercer studied the scene through the permaglass. A heavy 6-wheeled nomadic trade crawler blocked the pass. The machine resembled a massive steel centipede. Reinforced cargo pods formed the segmented body. Thick, puncture-resistant synthetic rubber treads wrapped around the drive wheels. Flames engulfed the primary cabin. Superheated plasma fire ate the reinforced ferritocrete armor. The fire burned a blinding, unnatural blue at the core, fading to jagged orange on the edges. The intense heat warped the air, turning the surrounding desert into a rippling funhouse mirror. Thick, toxic smoke billowed from the burning synthetic rubber treads. "Scan the perimeter," Mercer commanded the android. "Look for active cloaking fields. Look for the hauler." "Scanning," Proxy replied. A faint electronic whine filled the cabin. 0 active cloaking fields detected. The stolen hauler departed the sector. The remaining thermal tracks indicate they bypassed the crawler and continued north. Mercer unclasped his magnetic safety harness. He drew the pulse pistol from his thigh holster. He checked the green indicator light on the power cell. "Stay low," Mercer told Kalen. "Keep your finger off the trigger until you identify a target." Kalen nodded. His bruised face resembled carved granite. He offered zero argument. He pushed the gull wing door open. They stepped into the inferno. The heat radiating from the burning crawler felt like a physical wall pressing against their chests. The stench of vaporized engine coolant, burning wire insulation, and scorched synthetic fabric assaulted their lungs. Mercer moved with deliberate precision. He kept the pulse pistol raised, the emitter nozzle sweeping the jagged rocks lining the pass. He cleared the right flank. He cleared the left. He approached the rear of the burning centipede. The raiders executed a brutal pillage. The heavy cargo doors hung open. The magnetic locking mechanisms melted into useless slag. Ripped boxes of synthesized protein paste littered the dirt. Smashed water purification filters soaked the parched earth. The Drax brothers took the high-value items, the raw titanium, the hard credits, the medical supplies, and destroyed the rest. Kalen stopped at the edge of the scattered cargo. He looked down. A thick, dark smear of crimson blood painted the irradiated gravel. "Over here," Kalen said. His voice lacked emotion. It sounded flat and dead. Mercer followed Kalen's gaze. The blood trail led away from the burning crawler. It dragged through the dirt, ending behind a cluster of jagged basalt rocks 20 meters from the inferno. Mercer took the lead. He rounded the rock formation, pistol leading the way. A man lay in the shadows of the basalt. He wore a dust-caked environmental suit, the heavy canvas torn and stained black with grease. He clutched his chest with both hands. Dark blood pumped through his fingers, pooling in the dust. Mercer knelt beside the man. He kept his weapon ready, scanning the horizon. He holstered the pistol and examined the wound. A high-velocity pulse rifle blast caused the damage. The superheated bolt punched through the heavy canvas suit and shattered the sternum. The intense heat cauterized the edges of the entry wound, but the kinetic impact ruptured the internal organs. The man bled from the inside out. He possessed minutes, perhaps seconds, of cognitive function. The merchant opened his eyes. The whites showed thick red webbing. He stared at Mercer's canvas duster, then shifted his gaze to the ruined face of Kalen Vane. A wet, rattling cough shook the dying man's frame. Pink foam bubbled at the corners of his mouth. "They took the water," the merchant rasps. Every word required a massive toll of physical currency. "They took the fusion cores." "We tracked them," Mercer said. He kept his voice even. "Tell me about the men who hit your rig." "2 of them," the merchant gasped. "Augmented. Metal under the skin." The big one carried a sonic cannon. He stood in the center of the pass. "He forced me to halt the crawler." Kalen stepped closer. He hovered over the dying man like a vulture. He gripped the heavy hand cannon tighter. "Did the big man shoot you?" Kalen demanded. "Did Mick Drax pull the trigger?" The merchant stared at Kalen. Confusion clouded his dying eyes. He shook his head. A millimeter of movement, side to side. "No," the merchant choked. He spat a wad of blood into the dirt. The big man demanded the cargo keys. "I tossed them. I surrendered. I operate a trade route, not a mercenary squad. I survive by paying the toll. Who fired the weapon? Mercer pressed. The woman, the merchant whispered. The words hit Kalen like a physical blow. He staggered a half-step backward. The granite mask cracked. A woman, Kalen repeated the word. Dark hair. Silk dress. Pointed shoes. The merchant offered a ragged, bloody smile. A silk dress in the wastelands. A ghost from the orbital colonies. She smelled like a garden. Flowers and rain. Kalen closed his eyes. The rose, silica. The signature scent. The final piece of the delusion, shattered into microscopic dust. Tell me what she did, Kalen commanded. His voice dropped to a dangerous, jagged whisper. The merchant dragged another breath into his ruined lungs. He fought the darkness, closing in on his peripheral vision. She walked up to the cockpit window, the merchant explained. She carried a leather overnight bag. She smiled at me. A bright, beautiful smile. She asked me to unlock the secure cabin door. She claimed she needed the climate control. She claimed the big men frightened her. Kalen stared at the bleeding man. He pictured the scene. He pictured Lyra utilizing the exact same vulnerable persona she used to manipulate his heart in Sector 0. Did you open the door? Mercer asked. I flipped the magnetic seal, the merchant confessed. Regret mixed with the blood in his throat. I took pity on her. I thought she needed a sanctuary. And then, Kalen pushed. She climbed the access ladder, the merchant said. The life began to drain from his voice. The volume faded. She stood in the doorway. She looked at my navigation console. She looked at my personal lockbox, bolted to the floor. She pointed a heavy pulse rifle at my chest. Kalen squeezed the grip of his magnum. The synthetic rubber creaked under the pressure. She laughed, the merchant whispered. A tear cut a clean track through the dust on his cheek. She pulled the trigger. The bolt hit me. I fell out of the chair. I hit the floorboards. Mercer checked the man's pulse. Faint and erratic. The heart pumped mud. She stepped over me, the merchant finished the story. She shot the locking hinge off my personal box. She took my hard credits. She took my emergency water rations. She dropped a thermal incendiary charge into the cargo hold to cover the theft. She walked away while the cabin burned. The merchant grabbed the sleeve of Mercer's duster. His bloody fingers left a dark stain on the canvas fabric. Kill them, the merchant begged. The final surge of adrenaline fueled the words. Kill the augmented freaks. But shoot the garden bitch first. She possesses the blackest heart in the desert. The merchant's grip failed. His hand fell back into the dust. His chest stopped moving. His eyes fixed on the bleached sky above the rusted iron maces. The nomadic trader joined the permanent population of the deep wastelands. Mercer stood up. He wiped the blood from his duster sleeve. He looked at the dead man, then shifted his focus to the shop owner. Kalen stared at the corpse. He processed the narrative. He processed the laughter. He processed the calculated, cold-blooded murder. Lyra did not shoot the man to escape. She did not shoot the man in a panic. She shot a compliant, surrendered trader to steal his personal lockbox and his water. She stepped over his bleeding body to grab the credits. She burned his livelihood to the ground to hide the theft. Kalen raised his right hand. He stared at the heavy pulse magnum. He pushed the manual safety switch forward. The red indicator light flashed, signaling a live firing mechanism. He looked at Mercer. The battered, bruised face of the analog merchant vanished forever. A dead, hollow expression replaced the panic. The eyes registered zero empathy. The eyes registered zero hesitation. "We leave the body for the scavenger drones," Kalen stated. The command lacked any trace of his former humanity. "We return to the skiff. We follow the tracks." "You understand the rules of engagement now," Mercer said. He recognized the birth of a killer. He witnessed the exact moment a man crossed the line and burned the bridge behind him. "I understand the target," Kalen said. He turned his back on the dead merchant. He turned his back on the burning crawler. He walked straight toward the silver interceptor. "I understand the required velocity of the bullet." Mercer followed him back to the vehicle. The thick black smoke from the crawler painted a dark streak across the sky, a massive arrow pointing north, marking the path of the murderers. They climbed into the cabin. They sealed the gullwing doors. They engaged the primary turbines, leaving the inferno behind to chase the true monsters waiting in the deep desert. Chapter 10. The twin turbines pushed the Outland interceptor deeper into the irradiated basin. The sun dropped toward the jagged horizon, painting the sky the color of a bruised plum. Shadows stretched across the salt flats, turning every rock and ravine into a black void. Kalen Vane stared at the holographic projector in his lap. He kept his thumb pressed against the cold metal casing. He did not activate the beam. He stared at the blank emitter lens. The cold, focused rage he manufactured at the burning crawler began to fracture. The human mind possesses limits. It builds temporary dams against catastrophic trauma, but the water always finds a crack. "He lied," Kalen whispered. The sound barely breached the hum of the repulsors. Mercer kept his eyes on the tactical display. The thermal track of the stolen hauler held steady, cutting a path toward a treacherous mountain pass known as the Steel Peaks. "The merchant lied," Kalen repeated. The volume increased. A desperate ragged edge scraped his vocal cords. "A dying man spits poison. He resents the living. He invented a narrative to hurt us." "The merchant provided terminal testimony," Mercer stated. He adjusted the steering yoke, avoiding a deep fissure in the baked clay. A man exhaling his final breath lacks the energy to construct a complex fiction. He protected the Drax brothers. Kalen twisted in the passenger seat. His chest heaved. Sweat beaded on his bruised forehead, catching the pale green light of the dashboard instruments. "The cartels operate out here. They threaten families. Mick Drax promised to kill the merchant's kin if he identified the true shooter. The merchant substituted Lyra to protect his own bloodline. The Drax brothers operate as independent contractors," Mercer countered. "They hold zero leverage over nomadic traders. Accept the physical evidence, Kalen. The rose silica cap. The unforced footprints. The missing lockbox." Kalen shook his head. The motion grew violent, erratic. He slammed his fists against his own thighs. The merchant stole the lockbox. He orchestrated a fake raid. He shot himself to complete the illusion. A man does not blast a hole through his own sternum with a pulse rifle to hide a theft. "Turn the skiff around." Kalen lunged forward. He grabbed the carbon fiber dashboard with both hands. His knuckles turned stark white. "We return to the pass. We revive him. The trauma kits contain localized adrenaline spikes. We pump his heart. We force the truth out of his lying mouth." "The man bled out 20 minutes ago," Mercer said. The bounty hunter kept his voice flat, an anchor in the storm of Kalen's psychological collapse. His brain cells suffered irreversible hypoxic death. He represents scav drone food. Sit back in the synthetic leather. "You refuse?" Kalen's eyes widened. The purple, necrotic flesh around his orbital bones made him look like a reanimated corpse. A frantic primal terror replaced the granite facade. The reality of his wife's actions threatened to crush his sanity. He fought the realization, like a drowning man fights a sinking weight. I refuse to chase a ghost backwards, Mercer said. We track the thermal bloom. We catch the holler. Kalen reached into his waistband. The motion lacked grace, but it carried the desperate speed of a broken mind. He drew the heavy .45 caliber pulse magnum. The metal scraped against his canvas work shirt. He bypassed the manual safety switch. His thumb pushed the lever forward. The red indicator light flashed, painting a crimson dot on his trembling index finger. He leveled the heavy chrome barrel at Mercer's face. The emitter nozzle rested 30 centimeters from Mercer's right temple. The confined space of the cabin magnified the threat. A single twitch of Kalen's finger would vaporize the top half of Mercer's skull and send the interceptor tumbling at 200 kilometers an hour into the jagged rocks. Turn the steering yoke, Kalen ordered. Spit flew from his split lip, striking the dashboard. Disengage the forward thrusters. We go back. Proxy registered the threat from the jump seat. Lethal force deployed within the cabin. Assessing tactical countermeasures. Remain in standby, machine, Mercer commanded without turning his head. Mercer kept his hands locked on the yoke at 10 and 2. He did not flinch. He did not hit the brakes. The interceptor maintained a velocity of 180 kilometers per hour over the broken terrain. He stared straight ahead through the bug-splattered permaglass, watching the dark silhouette of the steel peaks grow larger. You point a loaded pulse weapon at the pilot of a speeding repulsor craft, Mercer noted. A gross miscalculation of physics. You pull that trigger, the plasma bolt melts my cranium. My lifeless body slumps forward. My chest pins the thrust lever to maximum. We impact a basalt wall before you draw your next breath. I embrace the impact. Kalen screamed. The sound tore his throat. I embrace the basalt. My life ended in Sector 0. Turn the ship. Mercer glanced at the trembling hand holding the magnum. He evaluated Kalen's pupil dilation. He evaluated the rapid, shallow breathing. The merchant crossed the threshold of rational thought. A neural snap. The brain prioritized self-deception over survival. Logic held zero power here. Kalen wanted to die rather than face the monster he married. Mercer needed a wedge. A sliver of doubt to disrupt the frantic energy. You cannot fire that weapon, Kalen, Mercer said. His tone projected absolute, unwavering certainty. I hold the grip. I hold the trigger. The safety shows red. The safety shows red, Mercer agreed. The firing mechanism engages. The trigger functions. But the weapon lacks a power source. Kalen blinked. The statement interrupted his manic loop. He stared down the barrel of the gun. I checked the cell. Full capacity. You checked the cell in the alley behind your shop, Mercer corrected. He kept his eyes on the horizon. He spoke with the casual cadence of a man discussing a mechanical defect. You handed the weapon to me. You asked me to inspect the safety. I popped the magnetic release. I dropped the high-capacity power cell into my palm. Kalen's breath hitched. You slid it back into the grip. I heard the click. You heard a click, Mercer said. I carry a spare thermal battery for my tactical flashlight in my left pocket. Same weight. Same dimensions. I slid the dead flashlight battery into your magnum. I kept your fully charged pulse cell. It currently resides in my canvas duster. Kalen stared at the bounty hunter. His bruised mind struggled to process the information. He looked at the pulse magnum in his hand. He looked at the green indicator light glowing on the side of the grip. The indicator shines green, Kalen argued. A residual charge in the capacitor, Mercer explained. The lie flowed smooth and flawless. It powers the LED lights. It fails to generate the required amperage to ignite the plasma coils. Squeeze the trigger. You get a hollow click. You get zero plasma. Doubt poisoned Kalen's resolve. He looked from Mercer's stoic profile to the weapon in his hand. If Mercer told the truth, the gun represented a useless chunk of chrome. If Mercer lied, pulling the trigger ended both their lives in a fiery crash. The cognitive dissonance paralyzed him. He needed to verify the claim. Kalen shifted his gaze. He tilted the weapon down, moving his left hand toward the magnetic release stud on the bottom of the grip to check the battery. He broke visual contact with Mercer. He broke the line of threat for one fraction of a second. Mercer moved. He released his right hand from the steering yoke. He executed a brutal, practice strike. The edge of his heavy combat boot found the thrust lever, maintaining the forward momentum. His right arm snapped across the center console. The heel of his palm connected with the side of Kalen's jaw. The impact sounded like a heavy wooden mallet striking a side of beef. The blow delivered massive kinetic force directly to the mandible, transferring the shockwave to the brain stem. Kalen's eyes rolled back in his skull. The tension vanished from his muscles. The pulse magnum slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the carbon fiber floorboards. Kalen slumped against the passenger door, out cold. His head bounced against the permaglass. Mercer caught the heavy chrome pistol with his right hand before it slid under the brake pedal. He brought his hand back to the yoke, stabilizing the interceptor's flight path. Threat neutralized, Proxy announced from the rear seat. Biometric scans indicate the subject suffered a grade 2 concussion. He remains unconscious. The ruse regarding the power cell proved highly effective. Mercer thumbed the magnetic release on the pulse magnum. The heavy glowing green power cell dropped into his lap. He checked the charge. Full capacity. He lied about the switch. The weapon possessed enough lethal energy to vaporize the entire cabin. He pushed the safety switch back to the locked position. He shoved the weapon into his duster pocket. The human mind breaks under pressure, Mercer said, speaking to the empty horizon. He needed a reason to look away. He needed an excuse to avoid pulling the trigger. His psychological state remains unstable, Proxy noted. Upon awakening, he presents a high probability of renewed hostility. Upon awakening, he faces the steel peaks, Mercer said. He adjusted the climate control, blasting cold air onto Kalen's bruised and unconscious face. He increased the thrust. The skiff ate the remaining distance to the mountains. The shadows lengthened, swallowing the salt flats in absolute darkness. The glowing red thermal track on the dashboard display led straight into the jagged, monolithic rocks ahead. The interceptor hit the base of the mountain range. The terrain pitched upward at a violent angle. The repulsor coils screamed, fighting the sudden gravity shear. The skiff ascended a narrow, twisting switchback carved into the side of a sheer granite cliff. The temperature outside plummeted. The humid baking heat of the desert floor vanished, replaced by the thin freezing air of the high altitudes. Mercer activated the high-beam headlights. Twin columns of pure white LED light pierced the gloom, illuminating the treacherous path. Loose scree and shattered quartz crunched beneath the magnetic suspension. To the right, a vertical drop of 1,000 meters offered a quick, brutal death for a single steering error. To the left, the solid rock wall of the mountain pressed close, scraping the side view mirror with jagged stone teeth. Kalen groaned. His head lolled against the seatbelt harness. A thin stream of drool escaped his split lip. He remained locked in the dark, his shattered mind healing in the forced shutdown. Mercer kept his focus absolute. He navigated the switchbacks with the precision of a surgeon. The thermal display showed the hauler's tracks cutting deeper into the mountain labyrinth. The Drax brothers knew this route. They picked a path requiring high-clearance repulsors and nerves of steel. They sought an isolated fortress to count their stolen credits and plan their next move. They believed the wastelands swallowed their pursuers. They believed the burning crawler erased their tracks. They miscalculated. Mercer pushed the skiff higher into the freezing dark. The pulse pistol rested heavy against his thigh. The stolen magnum weighed down his coat pocket. He carried enough kinetic energy to level a small building. He intended to deliver every single volt to the augmented monsters waiting at the summit. Chapter 11. Pain fractured Kalen's skull. He tasted old blood and alkaline dust. He opened his right eye. The harsh green LED light of the dashboard instruments pierced his retina, sending a fresh spike of agony deep into his brain. He raised a trembling hand. He touched his jaw. The bone throbbed, a deep rhythmic ache syncing with his erratic pulse. The interceptor climbed a vertical world. Solid black granite formed a jagged wall on the left. A terrifying void dropped away on the right. The digital altimeter displayed 3,000 meters. Frost rimmed the edges of the permaglass windshield. The cabin heater fought a losing battle against the high-altitude freeze, blowing tepid air over Kalen's bruised face. "You struck my face," Kalen hissed. The words scraped past his swollen lips. "I realigned your priorities," Mercer corrected. He kept his hands locked on the steering yoke. He stared through the frost-edged windshield, navigating the treacherous switchback. "You pointed a loaded pulse weapon at the pilot. You invited a fatal crash. You required an immediate system reboot. You lied concerning the power cell. I utilized a tactical deception to prevent a murder-suicide," Mercer stated. He offered zero apologies. The pulse pistol rested heavy against his thigh. Kalen's confiscated magnum dragged down the fabric of Mercer's right duster pocket. The brain prioritizes self-deception over survival under extreme stress. I gave your mind a puzzle to solve. I gave your hands a reason to lower the barrel. Kalen slumped against the passenger door. The cold permaglass numbed the side of his head. He stared into the absolute blackness of the mountain drop-off. The manic energy evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, exhausted shell. He possessed no more fight. He possessed no more denial. The deep wastelands stripped him of his illusions. "The hauler tracks," Kalen mumbled. "Do we hold the trail?" "The thermal bloom leads straight up the pass," Proxy answered from the rear jump seat. The android's amber eye glowed in the dark cabin. The ambient temperature drop preserves the heat signature with extreme clarity. They possess a 40-minute lead. A blinding streak of violet light split the darkness above them. The light struck the hood of the interceptor. The impact sounded like a detonating star. Kinetic energy tore the carbon fiber chassis apart. White-hot plasma and shredded composite material sprayed across the windshield. The port turbine screamed, a high-pitched mechanical death rattle, and seized. The skiff lost magnetic suspension. Gravity seized the heavy metal frame. The undercarriage slammed into the jagged scree. Sparks ignited the freezing night, an angry orange shower spraying across the cliff edge. Mercer fought the yoke. He utilized sheer physical strength to steer the sliding mass of dead metal into the granite wall instead of over the sheer drop. The interceptor hit the rock face. The impact crushed the passenger side quarter panel. Synthetic airbags deployed, punching Kalen deep into the seat. Thick, acrid smoke filled the cabin, choking the recycled air. "Exit the vehicle!" Mercer roared. He kicked his gull-wing door open. The metal hinges shrieked. "The power core risks a thermal breach. Move your legs." Kalen unbuckled his magnetic harness. Panic fueled his bruised muscles. He scrambled over the center console, following Mercer out the driver's side door. Proxy unfolded its metal limbs and tumbled from the rear compartment, hitting the dirt with a heavy metallic clank. A second violet streak struck the skiff. The heavy ion slug melted the engine block. The shot sent a shower of molten slag over the crushed hood. Mercer grabbed Kalen by the canvas collar. He dragged the shop owner away from the burning wreckage. He spotted a massive, rusted iron ore cart, abandoned by ancient miners on the edge of the switchback. He threw Kalen behind the heavy iron wheels and dove into the dirt beside him. Proxy scrambled behind the rear axle. They pressed their backs against the cold iron of the cart. The mountain wind howled, a bitter biting force that cut straight through Kalen's thin canvas workshirt. "Status?" Mercer demanded. His chest rattled. The cybernetic lungs strained in the thin oxygen, the internal gears grinding against the freezing air. "Hostile sniper," Proxy chirped. The android crouched in the frozen dirt, its optical sensors scanning the black peaks above. "Weapon profile matches a heavy ion accelerator. Anti-materiel ordnance. The shooter occupies a ridge 400 meters above our current elevation. The thermal signature remains hidden. Active cloaking field engaged." "A blind angle," Mercer said. He peered around the rusted iron wheel of the cart. Another violet slug smashed into the rock wall 2 meters away. The impact showered the ore cart with razor-sharp granite shards. Kalen covered his head with his bruised arms. He squeezed his eyes shut. "He tracks our body heat," Kalen yelled over the howling wind. His teeth chattered. The shock and the cold combined to trigger violent shivers down his spine. "He tracks the burning skiff," Mercer corrected. He pointed at the flaming wreckage of the interceptor 10 meters away. "We sit in the thermal shadow of a massive fire. He shoots at the expected cover. But he holds the high ground. He controls the pass." "The Drax brothers do not leave a sniper," Kalen stated. He wiped a mixture of sweat and frost from his forehead. "They operate as a pair. They lack a third man." "They hired local talent," Mercer said. He unslung his heavy canvas duffel bag. He dropped it into the dirt between his boots. "The cartels control these peaks. Drax paid a toll. He bought a rearguard to secure his ascent. He bought a man with an ion accelerator to hold the switchback." "We freeze on this ledge," Kalen despaired. "We freeze, or he blasts us into the void." "We return fire," Mercer said. He unzipped the main compartment of the duffel bag. He reached inside and pulled out a thick, matte black receiver. He placed the metal block in his lap. He reached into the bag again. He pulled out a long, heavy magnetic rail barrel. "You assemble a weapon in the dark?" Kalen asked. He stared at the assorted mechanical parts. "I assemble an equalizer," Mercer said. He slotted the barrel into the receiver. A heavy, satisfying click echoed over the wind. Mercer worked by touch. His calloused fingers knew every groove, every locking pin. He attached the power cell, a rectangular block of dense plasma. He snapped the heavy composite stock into place. Finally, he mounted the optic, a complex array of lenses and digital sensors. A kinetic rail rifle. Proxy identified the assembled weapon. Ammunition consists of solid tungsten sabots. Muzzle velocity exceeds Mach 6. A direct hit obliterates heavy armor. A direct hit vaporizes organic matter. Mercer slapped a heavy magnetic magazine into the well. He racked the charging handle. The rifle hummed, a low-frequency vibration signaling a live firing chamber. "Can you see the target?" Kalen asked. Hope crept back into his raw throat. Mercer rested the heavy barrel on the edge of the ore cart. He pressed his eye to the optic. He powered on the digital scope. The lens painted the mountain in stark monochromatic green. He scanned the jagged ridgeline, 400 meters above their position. He searched the rocks. He searched the shadows. Zero visual, Mercer admitted. He kept his eye glued to the rubber cup of the scope. The cloaking field bends the ambient light. It masks the thermal output. He blends perfectly with the black granite. Then you shoot blind. A cloaking field requires massive power, Mercer explained. He adjusted the magnification dial on the scope with his left thumb. The generator outputs residual static electricity. It creates a micro-distortion in the air. A ripple. You watch for the ripple. A fourth violet slug slammed into the front of the ore cart. The rusted iron groaned under the kinetic transfer. The impact punched a fist-sized dent inward, missing Mercer's left shoulder by inches. The sheer force pushed the heavy cart backward a full centimeter, grinding the rusted wheels against the scree. The iron shield degrades, Proxy noted. The android calculated the structural integrity. 3 additional direct impacts will breach the cart. The tungsten core will penetrate our cover. He corrects his aim, Mercer said. He ignored the failing iron. He ignored the freezing wind biting his cheeks. He ignored the rattle of his failing mechanical lung. He entered the hunter's trance. He tuned out the panic of the shop owner. He swept the green crosshairs across the high ridge. He hunted the invisible ripple. He spotted a slight distortion. A patch of stars in the background sky shimmered, shifting out of alignment for a fraction of a second. The sniper adjusted his stance. The cloaking field struggled to compensate for the movement. Mercer exhaled his remaining breath. He placed his finger on the trigger. He prepared to send a tungsten sabot through the distortion. He checked his angle. He calculated the trajectory. He lowered the rifle. The angle fails, Mercer declared. He pulled the heavy weapon back behind the cover of the cart. You found the target, Kalen panicked. Fire the weapon. He holds the superior trajectory, Mercer said. He pointed the barrel at the sheer rock face leading up to the ridge. He rests his weapon behind a solid granite outcropping. My tungsten sabot hits the rock face below his position. The shot shatters against the mountain. It alerts him to my capabilities. He pins us down until the cold stops our hearts. What constitutes the alternative? Kalen asked. He clutched his chest. The adrenaline faded, letting the freezing temperature sink deep into his bones. Mercer pointed to a narrow, vertical fissure cut into the solid granite wall to their left. A natural chimney stretching up into the blackness, bypassing the switchback path. I changed the geometry, Mercer said. He slung the heavy rail rifle over his shoulder. The thick nylon strap dug into his canvas duster. He reached into his pocket. He drew the pulse magnum. He handed the heavy chrome pistol to the shop owner. Kalen stared at the weapon. He refused to touch the grip. You stated the weapon lacked a power source, Kalen said. I lied, Mercer reminded him. The cell holds a full charge. Push the safety forward. Pull the trigger. It fires superheated plasma. Mercer grabbed Kalen's bruised hand. He slapped the magnum into the merchant's palm. He closed Kalen's fingers around the rubberized grip. You create a distraction, Mercer ordered. You fire blind bursts at the ridge. You force the sniper to focus on this rusted cart. You keep his optical sensors locked on your plasma flashes. Kalen looked at the dark, vertical fissure in the rock wall. He looked back at the bounty hunter. You climb the wall. In the dark. Carrying 20 kilos of tungsten hardware. I secure a flanking position, Mercer said. I gain elevation. I put a sabot through the top of his skull. You keep him busy. Mercer did not wait for an argument. He turned his back on the terrified merchant. He sprinted the short distance from the ore cart to the base of the granite chimney, diving into the deep shadow of the fissure before the sniper registered the movement. He pressed his back against the cold stone, preparing to ascend into the void. Chapter 12. Mercer pressed his spine against the back wall of the vertical granite fissure. He walked his combat boots up the opposite face, bridging the 1-meter gap with his body. The rock felt like solid ice. The wind funneled down the natural chimney, an invisible battering ram intent on peeling him off the mountain. He pulled a pair of magnetic adhesion climbing grips from his duster pockets. The heavy gloves consisted of reinforced synthetic leather woven with industrial microcoils. He slid his calloused fingers into the stiff material. He toggled the activation switches on the wrists. The coils hummed, a low-frequency vibration buzzing against his radius bone. He slapped his right palm against the sheer granite face. The electromagnets engaged with a sharp, metallic snap. The glove locked onto the microscopic iron veins buried deep within the mountain stone. He tested the hold. He pulled his entire body mass against the grip. The glove held firm. He slammed his left hand against the rock. Snap. He established a baseline anchor. The mountain fought his ascent. The temperature hovered far below freezing. Frost coated the slick stone. His breath plumed in thick white clouds, snatched away by the gale. The heavy kinetic rail rifle slapped against his spine, a 20-kilo pendulum, throwing his center of gravity off balance. The thick nylon sling dug deep into his collarbone. Below him, Kalen Vane joined the war. A blinding flash of neon blue illuminated the switchback edge. The heavy .45 caliber pulse magnum roared. The superheated plasma bolt screamed across the canyon void, striking the high ridge. The impact showered the darkness with molten slag. A second flash followed. Then a third. Kalen fired blind bursts into the black sky. The merchant emptied the heavy chrome pistol, screaming a raw, ragged battle cry. The sound bounced off the jagged peaks, the noise of a broken man, converting absolute despair into kinetic energy. The cartel mercenary responded. A violet streak split the blackness, originating from the cloaked position on the ridge. The heavy ion slug smashed into the rusted ore cart, protecting Kalen and Proxy. The kinetic shockwave vibrated through the solid mountain foundation. The impact sent a shower of pulverized dust raining down the chimney, coating Mercer's face in alkaline grit. Mercer tasted copper. He tasted dirt. His cybernetic lung stuttered. The internal turbine ground against the freezing air, a harsh, metallic rattle vibrating inside his chest cavity. The microfilters clogged with the falling rock dust. The machine skipped a beat. A sharp, burning needle of pain pierced his sternum. He paused his ascent. He gasped for oxygen. The thin mountain atmosphere offered zero relief. He slammed his fist against his own chest plate. The percussive impact forced the turbine to cycle. The machine whined, resuming its desperate rhythm. He utilized the noise of the firefight. He pushed his legs. He slapped the magnetic gloves against the freezing stone. Snap. Pull. Snap. Pull. He established a brutal, punishing cadence. He scraped his canvas duster against the jagged edges of the fissure, tearing the heavy fabric. Sharp granite sliced through his trousers, biting into his knee. He ignored the blood. He ignored the cold. He gave all focus to the tiny sliver of starry sky, visible 15 meters above his head. Another plasma burst lit the canyon floor. Another violet ion slug hammered the iron cart. The rusted metal groaned, a sickening sound of failing structural integrity. Proxy calculated 3 impacts before the cart breached. That strike constituted number 2. The next slug held a high probability of punching through the oxidized iron and vaporizing the shop owner. Kalen possessed 0 borrowed time. Mercer forced his burning muscles to fire one final sequence. He jammed his bleeding knee into a jagged crack. He reached high with his right hand, slapping the magnetic glove against the rock lip of the summit. The electromagnet locked solid. He hauled his torso over the edge. He rolled onto a flat plateau of windswept granite. He lay flat on his stomach. He sucked the freezing air through his clenched teeth. He ignored the burning pain in his chest. He ignored the bleeding cuts on his face. He unslung the rail rifle. He dragged the heavy weapon into a prone firing position. He flipped the bipod legs out. The metal feet clicked against the stone, finding purchase in small divots. He pressed his eye to the rubber cup of the digital optic. He thumbed the power stud. The lens booted up, painting the mountain in stark monochromatic green. Data strings scrolled across the periphery of the display. Range, elevation, wind speed, barometric pressure. He occupied a position 50 meters above and behind the sniper's ridge. The flanking maneuver succeeded. He held the superior angle. He held the high ground. He scanned the lower ridge through the green lens. The cloaked sniper lay prone behind a jagged outcropping of basalt. The active cloaking field distorted the rock face, creating a shimmering mirage in the freezing night. The sniper kept his heavy ion accelerator mounted on a low tripod. The massive, insulated barrel pointed down at the switchback below. The cartel mercenary tracked the plasma flashes. The mercenary ignored his rear flank. He trusted the mountain to protect his back. A fatal, tactical error. Mercer studied the shimmering distortion. He needed a specific target point to ensure a clean kill. A cloaking field generator emits a faint thermal exhaust centered over the primary power matrix. A tiny circular vent designed to bleed off excess heat. Mercer found the vent. A minuscule blur of rising heat against the cold rock background. The center of mass. He aligned the green crosshairs. He placed the center reticle over the thermal blur. He checked the digital wind gauge. A steady crossbreeze howled off the summit. He adjusted his aim 2 mils left to compensate for the drift. He calculated the projectile drop. Minimal at this 50-meter distance. The solid tungsten sabot traveled at Mach 6. It reached the target before the sound of the shot left the barrel. Down on the switchback, Kalen fired another wild plasma burst. The blinding blue light cast long dancing shadows across the canyon. The cloaked sniper shifted his weight. The shimmer moved a fraction of an inch. The sniper prepared to send the final, armor-breaching ion slug into the rusted ore cart. Mercer exhaled his final breath. He stilled the mechanical rattle in his chest. He locked his joints. He pulled the trigger. Chapter 13. Mercer pulled the trigger. The kinetic rail rifle delivered a punishing recoil against his shoulder socket. A crack of displaced air shattered the mountain silence, followed by the supersonic boom of the tungsten sabot breaking the sound barrier. The projectile crossed the 50-meter void in a microsecond. It struck the center of the thermal blur. The impact produced a wet, heavy thud. The cloaking field generator overloaded. A shower of blue sparks erupted from the rock face. The shimmering mirage collapsed, snapping out of existence. The cartel sniper materialized, slumped over the jagged basalt outcropping. Down on the switchback, Kalen ceased firing. The blinding neon blue flashes of the pulse magnum stopped. The sudden darkness dominated the canyon. The wind reclaimed the high peaks, howling through the vertical fissures, carrying the smell of ozone and vaporized stone. Mercer engaged the safety on the rail rifle. He folded the bipod legs. He slung the heavy weapon over his canvas duster. He stood upon the flat granite plateau. He ignored the burning pain in his ribs and the mechanical rattle of his cybernetic lung. He drew his pulse pistol from his thigh holster. He navigated the treacherous, ice-coated scree, moving down toward the sniper's nest. He planted his combat boots with deliberate care, fighting the brutal crosswind pushing him toward the canyon drop-off. He reached the outcropping. The cartel mercenary lay tangled in the tripod legs of the heavy ion accelerator. The tungsten sabot punched a clean hole through the back of the sniper's skull, exiting through the faceplate of his environmental helmet. The hypervelocity round scrambled his neural pathways before his brain registered the intrusion. He died without realizing a hunter flanked his position. Mercer kicked the ion accelerator away from the corpse. The massive weapon clattered against the rocks. He holstered his pistol and knelt beside the body. He pulled a compact tactical flashlight from his belt. He thumbed the activation stud. A tight beam of stark white LED light cut through the gloom, illuminating the dead man. The sniper wore standard cartel tactical webbing over his chest. Thick polymer plates covered his vital organs. A bandolier of violet ion slugs wrapped around his waist. Underneath the webbing, a specific garment caught the harsh light. A heavy, insulated winter coat. The material glowed a vibrant, unnatural sapphire blue. A high-tech thermal weave designed for extreme orbital conditions. Silver magnetic clasps ran down the front seam. A rigid, stand-up collar protected the neck from sub-zero temperatures. Mercer recognized the design. A blue snap survival jacket. He remembered the shattered analog shop in Sector 0. He pictured a row of high-end, salvaged extreme weather gear hanging on a reinforced steel rack near the front permaglass window. The Drax brothers looted the shop during the kinetic breach. They took the hard credits. They grabbed premium inventory on their way out the door. The cartel sniper demanded payment for his rearguard services. The Drax brothers lacked digital currency. They paid the toll with stolen goods. Mercer pulled a serrated combat knife from his boot. He sliced the thick nylon straps of the tactical webbing. He pulled the harness free, tossing it onto the scree. He examined the blue jacket. The left sleeve bore a small analog price tag attached with a nylon loop. Kalen Vane's precise handwriting marked the tag, orbital surplus. 500 credits. The physical evidence cemented the trail. Mick Drax climbed this exact pass hours earlier. Mercer patted down the sapphire pockets. He searched for spare ion slugs, communication devices, or digital cred sticks. His calloused fingers brushed against a flat, stiff rectangle in the interior breast pocket. He unfastened the silver magnetic clasps. He reached inside the jacket. He pulled out a folded piece of heavy paper. Physical paper represented a luxury item in the Dredge. People utilized digital slates and holographic projectors for communication. Real wood pulp paper belonged to the high-rise executives and the orbital elite. The cartel scavengers possessed zero use for such delicate material. He unfolded the sheet under the beam of his flashlight. The paper featured a custom embossed border. A delicate floral pattern framed the edges. Cursive handwriting filled the center, written in dark permanent ink. Mercer lifted the paper. The mountain wind shifted, blowing past the letter and hitting his face. The scent hit his olfactory sensors. Manufactured sandalwood. Crushed synthetic rose petals. Rose silica. The exact signature aroma Kalen obsessed over in the Silver Interceptor. The 200-credit hydrating mist from Elysium Station. The perfume Lyra Vane wore every single day. Mercer lowered the paper. The cartel sniper carried a physical letter written on Lyra Vane's custom stationery. The Drax brothers handed the mercenary a message. A set of instructions. A map. Or perhaps a ransom demand intended for the pursuers. Mercer folded the heavy paper. He slipped it into the breast pocket of his own canvas duster, sealing it away from the freezing wind. He grabbed the dead sniper by the collar of the sapphire jacket. He hauled the corpse up, dragging the dead weight to the edge of the ridge. He looked down into the black void of the canyon. He released his grip. The body vanished into the darkness, swallowed by the mountain. A final act of housekeeping. He picked up the heavy ion accelerator. He slung the massive weapon over his left shoulder, balancing the weight of his kinetic rail rifle on his right. He turned his back on the sniper's nest. He retraced his path up to the flat granite plateau. He approached the vertical chimney. Descending the sheer rock face in the dark presented a massive risk. Gravity pulled at the heavy hardware strapped to his chest and back. He activated his magnetic adhesion gloves. He slid his boots over the lip of the plateau, trusting the microscopic iron veins to hold his mass. Snap. Release. Drop. Snap. He established a reverse cadence. He descended into the black fissure, the wind howling around his shoulders. The cold sapped the strength from his synthetic muscles. The heavy cartel weapon slapped against the rock wall. Sparks showered into the darkness. His cybernetic lung fought the altitude. The internal turbine whined, a high-pitched scream of metal grinding on metal. He tasted blood in his throat. He forced his fingers to maintain the grip. He reached the canyon floor. His boots hit the loose gravel of the switchback. The rusted iron ore cart sat battered and dented, but intact. The thick oxidized metal survived the ion slug impacts. Proxy stepped out from behind the rear axle. The android analyzed the situation. Hostile threat neutralized, the android chirped. The probability of survival increases to 12%. We lack transportation. We lack thermal shelter. Shut down your vocal processor, Kalen barked. He kicked the dirt. We lack a functioning plan. Kalen knelt in the gravel. The merchant held the empty .45 caliber pulse magnum in both hands, pointing the useless weapon at the shadows. Mercer stepped out of the darkness. Kalen flinched. He tightened his grip on the heavy chrome pistol. He recognized the canvas duster and lowered the barrel. The violet flashes stopped, Kalen rasped. His throat sounded raw, shredded by his desperate battle cries. You eliminated the threat. I secured the high ground, Mercer confirmed. He unslung the massive ion accelerator. He dropped the captured weapon onto the dirt at Kalen's feet. The sniper caught a tungsten sabot. He left the mountain. The heavy cartel weapon lay in the dirt, a massive slab of dark alloy and thermal coils. The barrel radiated heat, melting the frost forming on the gravel beneath it. Kalen stared at the heavy hardware. The reality of their survival began to thaw his frozen, panic-stricken mind. He looked at the smoking wreckage of his silver interceptor 10 meters away. The fire burned down to a dull orange glow, consuming the last of the synthetic interior. We lost our transport, Kalen noted. We stand stranded on this ledge. We possess 2 legs, Mercer said. He reached into his duster pocket. And we possess a clear trail. The Drax brothers passed through this exact choke point. Mercer pulled the folded piece of heavy paper from his pocket. He held it out in the freezing wind. The sniper carried payment from Mick Drax, Mercer explained. He wore a sapphire blue tech jacket. An extreme weather garment. It carried an analog price tag bearing your handwriting. Kalen swallowed. He nodded. The blue snap jacket. Size large. I hung it near the front register. They looted my retail floor while they melted my vault. They gave the jacket to the sniper, Mercer said. But the jacket contained a secondary item. Mercer thrust the folded paper closer to Kalen's bruised face. Take it, Mercer ordered. Smell the parchment. Kalen reached out with a trembling hand. He took the heavy paper. He brought it close to his nose. The scent of rose silica hit him. The floral aroma overpowered the smell of scorched ozone and burnt engine coolant lingering in the air. Kalen squeezed his eyes shut. A fresh wave of agony washed over his battered features. The scent acted like a key, unlocking the memories of his life in Sector Zero. He pictured the piano. He pictured the velvet curtains. He pictured the woman who dismantled his entire existence. "Lyra's stationery," Kalen whispered. He opened his eyes. He stared at the embossed floral border in the dim light. She ordered this heavy stock from a corporate supplier. She claimed she enjoyed the tactile sensation of physical writing. "Read the words," Mercer instructed. "The light fails," Kalen argued. He clutched the paper tight against his chest, shielding it from the wind. He feared the ink. He feared the finality written on the page. Mercer drew his tactical flashlight. He clicked the beam on. He aimed the stark white circle of light at the folded letter in Kalen's hands. "Open it," Mercer demanded. "Read the ink. Terminate the final delusion." Chapter 14. Kalen unfolded the heavy paper. The mountain wind tore at the edges, threatening to snatch the document into the dark canyon. Mercer kept the stark white LED beam of his tactical flashlight locked on the center of the page. The dark cursive ink stood out sharp against the cream-colored background. Kalen stared at the first line. His jaw worked, but his vocal cords produced zero sound. The words dismantled his past. Every syllable acted like a kinetic strike against his memories. His bruised hands trembled, shaking the paper in the stark light. Mercer reached out. He plucked the document from the merchant's battered fingers. "You lack the oxygen," Mercer stated. I read the text. Kalen offered zero resistance. He let his arms fall to his sides. He stared at the loose gravel covering the switchback ledge. The wreckage of the silver interceptor burned a dull, dying orange 10 meters away. Mercer cleared his throat. He read the cursive script aloud. The brutal practical words of Drax filled the freezing night air. Lyra. The scout drones mapped the northern grid. The peacekeepers abandoned Sector Zero completely. We possess a clean flight path. Endure the analog fool for 2 more weeks. Spring approaches. The atmospheric scrubbers clear the smog layer next month. We execute the breach then. Mercer paused. He let the wind fill the silence. He watched Kalen's shoulders slump. The merchant absorbed the kinetic impact of the truth. Mercer resumed reading. Locate the exact coordinates of the floorboard stash. Map the structural supports of the retail space. We utilize a Goliath Mag-Lev to rip the facade off the building. You scream. You play the victim. We grab you and the titanium credits in one motion. Jesse complains about the split, but he follows orders. Keep wearing that floral spray. I smell the dredge on you from here. Endure the dirt. The payout buys a permanent penthouse on Elysium. Mercer analyzed the handwriting. He pointed the flashlight beam at the heavy strokes of the ink. Look at the pen strokes, Mercer instructed. Heavy pressure on the downward lines. Sharp, precise loops. The author writes with supreme confidence. Drax utilizes a physical pen to bypass any digital surveillance in the dredge. He knows the peacekeepers monitor the sub-ether data streams. A paper letter leaves zero electronic footprint. A courier delivered it, Kalen deduced. His voice sounded like a hollow echo bouncing off the canyon walls. A scavenger brought it to the shop. I handed the scavenger a few credits for his trouble. I paid the man who delivered my execution orders. The cartel sniper acted as the courier, Mercer concluded. He tapped the edge of the paper. He dropped the message. He waited on the mountain for his extraction payment. A closed loop of information. Kalen dropped to his knees in the gravel. The sharp rocks bit through his canvas trousers. He buried his face in his hands. A dry, racking heave shook his shoulders. He vomited nothing but bile and alkaline dust onto the frozen dirt. Mercer folded the heavy paper. He returned it to his canvas duster pocket. He aimed the flashlight away from the kneeling man, offering Kalen the dignity of deep shadows. Proxy stepped forward from the rusted ore cart. The android's metal joints clicked in the cold. Psychological baseline shattered, Proxy observed. The amber eye tracked Kalen's erratic breathing. The subject experiences a complete paradigm collapse. His internal narrative contradicts empirical data. Silence your processor, Mercer commanded. Proxy complied. The android locked its servos into a rigid standby posture. Kalen wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He stared at the dark stain he left in the gravel. He raised his head. The neon glow of the destroyed interceptor reflected in his unbroken eye. The despair vanished. A cold, flat emptiness replaced the panic. The merchant from Sector 0 died on this ledge. The man remaining possessed zero ties to the past. He possessed zero illusions. Kalen stood up. He pointed a bruised finger at the black mountain peak towering above them. They wait up there. They occupy the summit, Mercer confirmed. They believe the sniper secured their rear flank. They count your hard credits. They plan their next vector. We lack a vehicle, Kalen stated. He looked at the steep, winding path carved into the solid granite. We climb on foot. The ascent requires 2 hours, Mercer calculated. The temperature drops another 10 degrees. The air thins. I feel zero cold, Kalen said. Kalen walked to the heavy cartel ion accelerator resting in the dirt. He squatted beside the massive weapon. He gripped the thick thermal barrel and the heavy alloy stock. He lifted the hardware. The weight strained his bruised ribs, but he held the weapon steady across his chest. You lack the training to fire that ordnance, Mercer warned. The recoil snaps collarbones. The thermal backblast burns unprotected skin. Show me the safety mechanism, Kalen demanded. He offered zero room for debate. He locked his gaze on the bounty hunter. Show me the charging handle. Mercer approached the shop owner. He pointed his flashlight at the dark receiver of the cartel weapon. He traced a heavy metal lever with his thumb. You pull this back. It chambers the violet slug. You push this square stud forward to disengage the safety locks. You brace the stock tight against your shoulder. You lean your entire body weight into the blast. You pull the trigger, you destroy whatever stands in front of the nozzle. Kalen pulled the heavy charging handle. The metal action cycled with a brutal mechanical crunch. He shoved the safety stud forward. He slung the massive weapon over his right shoulder, using the thick nylon strap. The insulated barrel pointed toward the starry sky. He bent down. He retrieved the empty .45 caliber pulse magnum from the gravel. He shoved the chrome pistol back into his waistband. Mercer checked his own gear. The kinetic rail rifle hung secure across his back. The pulse pistol rested in the thigh holster. He checked his spare thermal cells. He possessed enough ammunition to wage a small war on the peak. Proxy, Mercer called out to the machine. Track the thermal footprints. Lead the ascent. Acknowledged, the android replied. The amber eye projected a golden grid onto the frozen scree. The heavy hauler tracks continue up the switchback. The incline grades at 15%. Proxy began the march. The metal feet crunched a steady rhythm against the silence of the high peaks. Kalen followed the android. He walked with a heavy, purposeful stride. He ignored his fractured ribs. He ignored the throbbing pain in his jaw. The betrayal fueled his muscles. The words of the letter burned in his mind, providing all the necessary thermal energy to conquer the freezing mountain. Mercer took the rear guard. He watched Kalen navigate the treacherous path. The transformation reached its conclusion. A man holding on to love hesitates. A man holding on to nothing pulls the trigger until the weapon melts. They climbed into the absolute dark. The switchback carved deeper into the mountain. The granite walls closed in, blocking the starlight. Proxy provided the only illumination, the amber sensor casting long, distorted shadows across the rocks. The wind screamed through the narrow gaps, a chorus of damned souls trapped in the stone. Ice formed on Mercer's duster. Frost crystallized on the heavy barrel of Kalen's captured weapon. She hated the smell of the shop, Kalen said, throwing his words over his shoulder. The thin air stole his breath, forcing him to speak in clipped fragments. The letter stated she smelled the dredge on herself. The dredge possesses a distinct odor, Mercer agreed. He matched Kalen's pace, keeping his boots clear of the loose scree at the canyon edge. She bathed 3 times a day. She utilized the purified water. I hauled those tanks myself. I paid double the standard rate to secure the clean filters. She viewed the water as a basic right, Mercer explained. She viewed your efforts as the expected service of a lower-class servant. A mark. A target. 6 months, Kalen rasped. She shared my living quarters for half a year. She smiled at me across the mahogany counter. She touched my arm. She constructed a flawless performance. The cartels employ similar operatives, Mercer said. They call them ghosts. They infiltrate a rival organization. They learn the security protocols. They identify the weaknesses. They wait for the optimal strike window. Your wife operated as a corporate-level ghost. She complained about the dust, Kalen continued, dismantling every memory piece by piece. She bought a synthetic feather duster. She spent hours cleaning the vintage cathode ray tubes. I viewed it as nesting. I viewed it as her taking pride in our home. She cataloged the inventory, Mercer corrected. She estimated the physical value of your salvage. She searched for hidden compartments while pretending to clean the dust. She found the floorboards. She manipulated you into revealing the floorboards, Mercer clarified. The letter states she planned the breach before the winter solstice. Every kiss, every shared meal, every promise of a future, a calculated maneuver to access the titanium credits. Kalen stumbled on a jagged root protruding from the frozen dirt. He fell forward, catching his weight on the metal frame of the ion accelerator. The heavy weapon gouged a trench in the gravel. Mercer reached out. He grabbed the shoulder of Kalen's canvas shirt. "Release me," Kalen snarled. He slapped Mercer's hand away. He pushed himself upright. He brushed the dirt from his bruised knees. "I require 0 assistance." "Conserve your energy," Mercer advised. "The summit requires all your remaining strength. Anger burns hot, but it burns fast. You need cold fuel to survive the peak." "The letter provides the cold fuel," Kalen said. He patted his chest right over his heart. He tapped the fabric. "I freeze the anger. I turn it into solid ice." The path leveled out for 10 meters before cutting back at a vicious angle. A sheer wall of solid ice blocked the right flank. A frozen waterfall, trapped in time by the brutal altitude. Kalen stared at the ice. He saw his own distorted reflection in the frozen surface. The bruised, battered face of the analog merchant stared back. He looked away. He rejected the image. He rejected the victim. The air grew impossibly thin. Every inhalation required conscious effort. Kalen's chest heaved. The mechanical turbine inside Mercer's ribcage whined a constant, desperate pitch. Proxy halted. The android raised a rigid metal arm. Atmospheric change detected, the machine reported. The amber eye dimmed, shifting into a stealth mode. Scent of ionized plasma and burning wood registers in the upper air currents. We approached the summit plateau. Distance to target zone measures 500 meters. Kalen racked the heavy charging handle of the ion accelerator one more time, verifying the chambered slug. The metallic clack sounded final. It sounded like a heavy iron door slamming shut on a tomb. 500 meters, Kalen repeated. He looked at the bounty hunter. We finish the ascent. We find the fire. We collect the debt. Mercer unslung the kinetic rail rifle. He checked the magnetic magazine. We move silent, Mercer ordered. We identify the targets before we engage. You fire that heavy weapon early, you blind us with the thermal flash. Kalen nodded. He tightened his grip on the alloy stock. He stepped past the android, taking the lead on the final stretch of the dark, frozen path. Chapter 15. The granite switchback terminated at a jagged rock shelf. Proxy raised a rigid metal fist, signaling a halt. Mercer crouched low. He crept to the edge of the precipice. Kalen followed, dragging the heavy cartel ion accelerator across the frozen stone. They peered over the rim. A massive plateau opened before them. An abandoned lithium excavation site scarred the mountain peak. Deep, unnatural gouges cut into the earth, forming a man-made crater. Rusted sorting machinery loomed against the starry sky like skeletal remains of ancient steel beasts. Tangles of oxidized copper wire and collapsed conveyor belts littered the gravel floor. A fire consumed shattered wooden pallets inside a 50-gallon chemical drum near the main tunnel entrance. The orange flames cast long, dancing shadows across the crater. Two outland skyskiffs sat parked 10 meters from the fire. The repulsor coils glowed a faint, cooling blue, indicating recent shutdown sequences. Mercer studied the tactical layout. He swept the area through the green lens of his digital optic. 3 thermal signatures, Proxy whispered from the darkness behind them. The android processed the environmental data. The targets occupy the space near the fire. They consume synthetic rations. They display zero combat readiness. They believe the altitude and the sniper protect their position. Kalen stared at the firelight. He recognized the silhouettes moving against the orange glow. 2 massive shapes possessing square armored profiles. One smaller, slender shape wrapped in a stolen thermal blanket. Lyra. He watched her silhouette shift. She lifted a metal cup to her mouth. She tossed her head back. She laughed. The sound carried on the thin mountain wind, slicing through the freezing air and reaching Kalen's ears. A bright, musical note. The exact laugh she utilized when he gifted her the antique Steinway piano in Sector 0. The exact laugh she employed when she played the loving wife. The sound triggered a physical reaction. Kalen retreated from the rock edge. He slumped against the solid granite wall of the pass. He squeezed his eyes shut, fighting the phantom pain in his chest. He reached into his canvas shirt pocket. He withdrew the silver holographic projector. He pressed the activation stud. The pale blue light illuminated his bruised, battered face. Lyra's 3-dimensional portrait floated in the freezing air between his calloused hands. The calculated smile. The dark, evaluating eyes. The flawless hair. He stared at the light. He juxtaposed the pristine digital image against the callous, musical laugh echoing over the dead lithium mine. He matched the beautiful face with the dead nomadic trader bleeding out in the salt flats. "Turn off the device," Mercer commanded. He kept his eyes focused on the crater below. The blue glow compromises our elevation advantage. Kalen ignored the bounty hunter. He gripped the metal cylinder tight. I built a fortress in the dredge, Kalen whispered. The thin atmosphere stole the volume from his words, rendering them a desperate rasp. I reinforced the steel security doors. I upgraded the environmental scrubbers. I believed I protected an angel from a dead world. You built a bank vault, Mercer corrected. He turned away from the edge. He stared down at the broken merchant. She played a long game. She identified the mark. She extracted the asset. The game concludes tonight. Kalen looked at the hologram one final time. He memorized the lie. He memorized the curve of her jaw and the exact shade of her synthetic eyeshadow. He cataloged the details of his own supreme foolishness. Then he acted. He slammed the silver cylinder against the solid granite wall. The permaglass lens shattered. The delicate internal circuitry crushed under the kinetic impact. The blue light flickered, sparked a brilliant white, and died. Absolute darkness reclaimed the narrow shelf. Kalen dropped the ruined electronics into the gravel. He brought his heavy combat boot down on the debris, grinding the metal and glass into the alkaline dirt until nothing recognizable remained. The analog merchant from Sector 0 died in that dirt. A cold, empty vessel stood up. The ghost of the dredge took command. The image lies, Kalen stated. His voice lacked any trace of grief. It sounded flat, jagged, and dangerous. The image presents a phantom. Kalen pulled the empty .45 caliber pulse magnum from his waistband. He pressed the magnetic release stud. The dead power cell dropped into his palm. He discarded the useless battery, tossing it over the cliff edge into the canyon void. He reached deep into the cargo pocket of his canvas trousers. He produced a specialized, crimson-colored power magazine. High-explosive plasma cores, Kalen explained. He slapped the crimson magazine into the magnum's grip. The weapon hummed with renewed, violent energy. A deep red indicator light replaced the standard green. I salvaged a crate of corporate military ordnance 3 years ago. I kept 2 magazines hidden outside the main vault. Mercer raised an eyebrow. The ambient starlight caught the metallic sheen of his cybernetic lung housing. You possess unregistered explosive rounds. A direct violation of sector peacekeeper mandates. I possess the means to level that tunnel, Kalen said. He racked the heavy slide, chambering the first explosive charge. He shoved the magnum back into his belt. He picked up the massive cartel ion accelerator. I utilized the heavy ordnance for the augmented freaks. I utilized the magnum for close quarters. Mercer unslung his kinetic rail rifle. He checked the action. He checked the bipod legs. He prepared his own hardware for the assault. We dictate the engagement, Mercer instructed. We hold the element of surprise. We use the rusted sorting machinery for cover. We advance to the 50-gallon drum before we announce our presence. Kalen nodded. He checked the safety mechanism on the heavy cartel weapon. Outline the sequence. Jesse Drax holds the nervous energy, Mercer explained, mapping the tactical approach. He paces. He watches the perimeter. He expects trouble. Drax sits. He trusts his reputation and his armor. We target Jesse first. You draw his attention. You step into the firelight. I act as the tether, Kalen agreed. You present a familiar face. You shock their system. They expect peacekeeper squads. They expect rival cartel hitmen. They expect zero analog merchants climbing the steel peaks holding an ion accelerator. That confusion buys me 2 seconds. 2 seconds allows you to execute the shot. I put a solid tungsten sabot through Jess's synthetic skull, Mercer said. The bounty hunter spoke of murder with the casual detachment of a mechanic discussing a busted transmission. Chaos erupts. Drax utilizes heavy weapons. He fires the sonic cannon. We break for the mine entrance. We trap them in the confined space of the tunnel. And Lyra? Kalen asked. Lyra represents a non-combatant until she picks up a weapon, Mercer answered. He locked his gaze on Kalen's bruised face, searching for any lingering hesitation. She runs. She hides. You handle the woman. She lacks the title of wife, Kalen said. He gripped the cold alloy stock of the ion accelerator. She represents a thief. She represents a murderer. Proxy stepped forward, joining the tactical briefing. Probability of a successful breach calculates at 42%. The Drax brothers possess superior kinetic armor, subdermal plating, and enhanced reaction times. The Drax brothers lack desperation, Mercer countered. He slapped the heavy magnetic magazine into his rail rifle. Desperation alters the mathematical probabilities. Desperation ignores kinetic armor. Mercer turned toward the plateau. He led the descent from the rock shelf down to the crater floor. They moved in absolute silence. The wind howled through the rusted girders of the abandoned sorting machinery, masking the crunch of their boots on the gravel. They slipped from shadow to shadow, utilizing the massive piles of discarded rock and twisted metal for cover. The temperature dropped further. Frost formed on the barrel of Kalen's weapon. His bruised ribs ached with every step, but the adrenaline overrode the pain receptors. He focused entirely on the orange glow of the fire ahead. They reached the final line of cover. A massive, overturned dump truck rested 20 meters from the 50-gallon drum. The rusted steel bed provided a solid barricade against incoming fire. Mercer dropped to a prone position behind the massive rear tires. He deployed the bipod legs of his kinetic rail rifle. He pressed his eye to the digital optic. Kalen crouched beside the heavy iron wheel. He rested the ion accelerator against the rusted fender. He looked past the truck, observing the camp. Drax sat on a wooden crate. The big man possessed a torso like a cargo container. Chrome plating covered his forearms and the left side of his jaw. He held a bottle of high-end synthesized wine, drinking straight from the glass neck. The stolen hard credits sat in the fire-resistant polymer bag at his feet. Jesse Drax paced the perimeter. The smaller brother moved with jerky, erratic steps. He held a custom pulse rifle across his chest. His cybernetic eyes glowed a faint red in the shadows, constantly scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. Lyra sat on a folding composite chair near the warmth of the drum. She wore the white silk robe, though dirt and ash now stained the hem. She held a silver thermal cup. She looked relaxed. She looked victorious. She spoke to Mick, gesturing with her free hand, her voice carrying over the crackling flames. The dredge suffocated me, Lyra complained to the big mercenary. She sipped her drink. The constant smell of old solder. The pathetic attempts at romance. He bought me a piano. He expected me to sit in that grimy back room and play sonatas while the acid rain dissolved the roof. Drax chuckled. A deep, rumbling sound. He took another pull from the wine bottle. The fool handed you the combination to the vault. He desired my affection, Lyra said. She offered a dismissive wave of her hand. Men holding onto their youth easily surrender their assets for a pretty smile. I endured 6 months of his tedious stories. I earned those titanium chips. Behind the rusted tire, Kalen listened to the exchange. The words stripped away the final microscopic layer of his humanity. She viewed him as a job. A mark. A tedious chore she endured for a payday. He looked at Mercer. Mercer gave a single, sharp nod. The bounty hunter acquired his target. The green crosshairs locked onto Jesse Drax's pacing skull. Kalen stood up. He stepped out from behind the rusted dump truck. He stepped out of the shadows. He walked into the orange glow of the firelight. He held the massive cartel ion accelerator across his chest. He stood tall, ignoring the pain, ignoring the freezing wind. He stared across the 20 meters of gravel at the woman who destroyed his life. "You earned nothing," Kalen announced. His voice shattered the mountain silence, ringing loud and clear across the crater. The pacing stopped. The drinking stopped. The laughter died. 3 heads snapped toward the source of the voice. They stared at the bruised, battered figure standing in the firelight. They expected a peacekeeper. They expected a rival cartel. They recognized the analog merchant from Sector 0. The shock paralyzed them for one critical second. That second belonged to the bounty hunter. Chapter 16. Mercer squeezed the trigger. The kinetic rail rifle delivered a punishing kick against his shoulder. The thick nylon sling bit deep into his canvas duster. The tungsten sabot broke the sound barrier, generating a miniature sonic boom that echoed across the dead lithium crater. The projectile crossed the 20 meters of open gravel in a fraction of a microsecond. Jesse Drax never completed his pacing cycle. The solid tungsten slug struck his right cybernetic eye. The hypervelocity impact shattered the reinforced optical lens, punched through the titanium orbital socket, and scrambled his synthetic cortex. A spray of blue sparks and crimson organic matter painted the gravel behind him. The massive kinetic energy lifted the smaller brother off his combat boots. He snapped backward, flying through the air like a discarded rag doll. He slammed into the corrugated steel siding of the primary sorting shed. The rusted metal crumpled inward, forming a deep impact crater. He slid down the wall, leaving a dark, wet streak of synthetic lubricant and blood. He hit the dirt. He stopped moving. Mick Drax possessed veteran instincts. The big mercenary ignored his fallen brother. He recognized the trap. A sniper covered the analog merchant. Mick kicked the wooden crate. The heavy box flipped, creating a low barricade between him and the dump truck. His massive, chrome-plated hands reached into the shadows behind the 50-gallon drum. He hoisted a customized sonic cannon. The weapon resembled a jet turbine bolted to a heavy rifle stock wrapped in thick thermal insulation. Kalen Vane stood in the open. The firelight danced across his bruised, battered face. He held the cartel ion accelerator. He aimed the massive barrel at Mick. "Die," Kalen roared. Kalen pulled the heavy trigger. He lacked the necessary tactical training. He lacked the stabilized stance required for anti-materiel ordnance. The ion accelerator unleashed a violet slug. The massive recoil struck Kalen like a physical blow from a mechanical press. The force dislocated his right shoulder with a sickening, audible pop. It lifted his boots off the gravel. He flew backward, landing hard on his spine. The heavy weapon tumbled away from his grip, clattering against the rocks. The violet ion slug missed Mick Drax. It sailed past the big man's right shoulder, missing his head by centimeters. It struck the parked heavy hauler skiff. The armor-piercing ordnance detonated the skiff's primary fuel cell. A blinding sphere of blue plasma engulfed the vehicle. The explosion shattered the high-altitude silence. A shockwave ripped through the crater, flattening the flames inside the 50-gallon drum. Shredded carbon fiber, melted permaglass, and molten alloy rained down on the camp. The heat washed over the gravel, singeing the edges of Mercer's canvas duster. Lyra screamed. The blast knocked her out of the composite chair. She hit the dirt. Her white silk robe caught a shower of gray ash, ruining the pristine fabric. The composed, arrogant socialite vanished. Pure, unfiltered panic took control of her features. She scrambled on her hands and knees, ignoring the jagged rocks biting into her palms. She reached the fire-resistant polymer bag containing Kalen's 80,000 hard credits. She hugged the heavy bag to her chest. She rose to her feet. She sprinted toward the black, rectangular opening of the abandoned lithium mine. "Move!" Mick shouted at her. "Get in the hole." Mick leveled the sonic cannon at the rusted dump truck. He deduced the sniper's location based on the trajectory of the tungsten sabot. He engaged the firing mechanism. The sonic cannon emitted zero light. It produced zero thermal flash. It unleashed a concentrated directed wall of low-frequency sound. The gravel between the fire and the truck danced, vibrating 2 inches off the ground as the wave approached. The invisible shockwave struck the rusted dump truck. Mercer felt the impact in his teeth. The rusted steel bed of the truck groaned, vibrating at a frequency that liquefied solid matter. The metal warped inward, forming a massive dent. The kinetic force pushed the entire truck backward 2 feet, plowing deep trenches into the gravel. The sound scrambled Mercer's equilibrium. His cybernetic lungs stuttered, the internal turbine fighting the extreme atmospheric pressure change. Blood trickled from his left nostril. He clamped his hands over his ears, pressing his jaw against the cold dirt. He tasted copper. Proxy tumbled backward. The android's internal gyroscopes failed. It hit the ground, its metal limbs flailing as the sonic wave disrupted its orientation sensors. Mick Drax maintained the suppressive fire. He backed toward the mine entrance. He kept the massive sonic weapon sweeping the crater. The invisible waves shattered the remaining permaglass on the second parked skiff. The directed sound pulverized loose rocks into fine powder, creating a thick cloud of alkaline dust. Lyra reached the tunnel. She disappeared into the absolute blackness, clutching the stolen fortune. Mick reached the threshold. He fired one final, sustained sonic burst at the dump truck, ensuring his pursuers remained pinned. Then he turned his massive frame and vanished into the mountain shadow. The crushing noise ceased. The high-altitude wind returned, whistling through the wreckage of the burning skiff. The blue plasma fire provided the only illumination in the crater. Mercer pushed himself up. The world spun. He spat a mouthful of metallic-tasting saliva into the dirt. He shook his head, clearing the sonic distortion from his brain. He grabbed the rail rifle. He scrambled around the side of the warped dump truck. He locked his green crosshairs on the black mouth of the mine. 0 targets presented themselves. The Drax brothers surrendered the open ground. They claimed the narrow, defensible tunnel. Mercer lowered the weapon. He walked toward Kalen. The shop owner lay flat on his back. He clutched his right arm against his chest. His face contorted in absolute agony. The cartel ion accelerator rested 3 meters away, half buried in the ash. "My shoulder," Kalen hissed through clenched teeth. The joint separated. Mercer knelt beside the merchant. He examined the awkward angle of the arm. The ball rested outside the socket. The muscle tissue strained against the unnatural position. "You fired heavy antimaterial ordnance without an anchor," Mercer stated. His tone offered 0 sympathy. "You ignored the laws of physics. Physics exacted a heavy penalty." "Fix the joint," Kalen demanded. He stared up at the starry sky, refusing to look at the mangled limb. Mercer placed his heavy combat boot against Kalen's ribcage. He grabbed Kalen's right wrist with both hands. He locked his grip. "Breathe deep," Mercer instructed. Kalen opened his mouth, drawing the freezing mountain air into his lungs. Mercer pulled. He applied sudden, brutal leverage. He hauled the arm outward and twisted the wrist, forcing the bone back into alignment. A loud, wet pop echoed over the burning skiff. Kalen screamed. The sound tore through his raw throat. He squeezed his eyes shut. Tears leaked from the corners, cutting fresh tracks through the grime covering his bruised face. He curled into a fetal position, cradling the reseated joint against his chest. He took short, rapid breaths, waiting for the white-hot pain to subside. Proxy righted itself. The android approached the men. The amber eye flickered, recalibrating the damaged visual sensors. Sonic disruption ended, Proxy reported. Internal gyroscopes stabilized. The hostiles occupy the subterranean shaft. Ground-penetrating radar indicates a labyrinth of overlapping tunnels extending 2 kilometers into the bedrock. A rat maze, Mercer said. He walked to the dead body of Jesse Drax. He stood over the fallen mercenary. He noted the shattered cybernetic skull and the exposed titanium wiring. He searched the corpse. He bypassed the digital cred sticks. He found a custom pulse rifle and 2 spare thermal magazines. He claimed the weapon. He slung it over his shoulder next to his own pulse pistol. He returned to Kalen. The shop owner forced himself into a sitting position. He breathed in ragged, shallow gasps. "Stand up," Mercer ordered. Kalen planted his left hand in the dirt. He pushed himself upright. He tested his right arm. He winced, but the limb supported its own weight. He rotated the shoulder, fighting the stiffness. "She ran," Kalen said. The words tasted like ash. "She grabbed the credits. She left me to face the heavy weapon." "She protected her investment," Mercer said. "She expects Mick Drax to eliminate the threat. She expects Mick Drax to carry her to Elysium Station. She cares nothing for the battle. He possesses the sonic cannon. He controls the narrow tunnel. A sonic weapon requires wide dispersion to maximize impact," Mercer explained. He pointed at the rectangular black opening cut into the mountain. "You fire a sonic wave down a narrow stone corridor, the sound bounces. The wave reflects off the solid granite walls. It hits the shooter. He utilizes that weapon inside the mine. He liquefies his own brain." Kalen looked at the dark tunnel. The orange glow of the burning skiff illuminated the first few meters of ancient wooden support beams. Beyond the beams, absolute darkness waited. A cold draft blew from the shaft, carrying the scent of deep earth and oxidized metal. "He relies on his pulse rifle now," Mercer continued. "He relies on his subdermal kinetic armor. He relies on the dark." Kalen walked over to the cartel ion accelerator. He stared at the massive weapon. He possessed zero desire to fire it again. The heavy ordnance required 2 good shoulders. He bent down with his left arm. He grabbed his .45 caliber pulse magnum from the dirt. He checked the crimson high-explosive magazine. He thumbed the safety switch. The red indicator light glowed bright. "I rely on the explosive rounds," Kalen stated. Mercer checked the charge on his tactical flashlight. He checked the action on the captured pulse rifle. He racked the slide, chambering around. "The sniper shot bought us the crater," Mercer said. "The tunnel represents a different war. We fight at zero distance. We fight blind. We fight a trapped animal." "Lead the way," Kalen said. They walked past the burning skiff. They walked past the 50-gallon drum, ignoring the heat radiating from the flames. They stepped over the threshold, leaving the starry sky behind, and plunged into the absolute crushing blackness of the dead lithium mine. Chapter 17. The lithium mine swallowed the ambient starlight. Absolute blackness pressed against their retinas. Mercer swept the tactical flashlight over the jagged granite walls. Ancient wooden support beams groaned under the immense weight of the mountain above. Dust motes danced in the stark white beam, disturbed by their heavy combat boots. "Switch to thermal optics," Mercer commanded the machine. "Thermal optics engaged," Proxy chirped. The amber eye shifted to a deep, pulsing crimson. 2 heat signatures occupy a chamber 100 meters down the primary shaft. The subjects maintain a stationary position. A chemical flare provides localized illumination. "Kill the light," Kalen whispered. Mercer thumbed the switch on his tactical flashlight. Total darkness reclaimed the tunnel. He tapped Kalen's canvas shoulder. "Follow the android," Mercer instructed. "Step where the metal feet step. Avoid the loose gravel. The enclosed space amplifies sound." Kalen nodded. The dark hid his movement, but he understood the stakes. He gripped the heavy .45 caliber pulse magnum. His dislocated shoulder throbbed, a dull ache radiating down his right arm. He ignored the pain. He focused on the crimson glow of the android's optical sensor, leading them deeper into the earth. They advanced. The air grew stagnant, tasting of oxidized iron, ancient rock dust, and dry rot. Faint echoes drifted down the tunnel, voices bouncing off the stone walls. Proxy raised a rigid metal arm. The android halted the procession. A rusted steel ventilation grate sat set into the right wall of the tunnel. The grate offered a sightline into an adjacent excavation cavern. A sickly green chemical light spilled through the iron bars, cutting geometric shadows across the dirt floor. Kalen pressed his face against the cold steel. He peered into the cavern. Drax sat on an overturned ore cart. The massive mercenary checked the action on his custom pulse rifle. Chrome plating reflected the green flare. He looked like a mechanical beast resting in a cage. Lyra stood near the light source. She held the fire-resistant polymer bag. She hugged the 80,000 hard credits to her chest. Her white silk robe hung in tatters, stained with ash and dirt. She shivered in the freezing subterranean air. "We hold this position," Mick grunted. The acoustics of the cavern carried his deep voice through the grate. The sniper caught a stray round. "The bounty hunter comes down the hole. Let him step into the choke point. I melt his armor." Lyra scoffed. She kicked a loose rock with her pointed heel. "The bounty hunter follows the analog fool. Kalen possesses 0 tactical skill. He builds antique radios. He drinks tepid tea. He bored me into a coma for 6 months." Kalen gripped the steel bars. The cold metal bit into his bruised knuckles. The physical pain grounded his fracturing mind. "He paid the bills," Mick said. "He racked the charging handle of the rifle. He funded this extraction." "He operated a tomb," Lyra countered. She smiled, a cruel, sharp expression twisting her beautiful features. "He believed he rescued me from the colonies. I spotted the loose floorboard the first week. I feigned a fear of digital vermin to make him open the physical vault. The man played the easiest mark on the grid. He traded his fortune for a few smiles and a silk dress. He possesses a weak, pathetic heart." Kalen stepped away from the grate. He looked at Mercer in the dim green light spilling into the tunnel. The bounty hunter saw the final death of the Sector Zero merchant. Only a cold, empty shell remained. A ghost. "I take the breach," Kalen whispered. He stepped past Mercer. He walked to the end of the tunnel, turning the corner into the open cavern. He stepped into the sickly green light. Drax reacted. The mercenary brought the pulse rifle up, aiming for the center of Kalen's chest. He anticipated an easy kill. He anticipated a terrified shop owner begging for his wife. He miscalculated. Kalen raised the .45 caliber pulse magnum. He squeezed the trigger. The crimson, high-explosive round detonated. The superheated plasma struck Mick's chest plate. The kinetic force shattered the subdermal armor, blowing the massive mercenary backward against the rock wall. The explosion deafened everyone in the cavern. A shockwave of dust and pulverized stone washed over the room, choking the green chemical flare. Mick slumped to the cavern floor. The pulse rifle clattered across the stone. A single muscle spasm shook his massive frame. He died. Lyra shrieked. She dropped the heavy polymer bag. The titanium credits spilled onto the dirt, a waterfall of metal coins clinking against the rock. She stared at the ruined corpse of the cartel enforcer, then shifted her wide eyes to Kalen. The arrogant socialite vanished. The terrified victim returned. A flawless practiced mask slipped over her features. She triggered the tears. Kalen. She fell to her knees. She reached her hands out toward him. Thank the stars. He forced me down here. He held a weapon to my spine. I cut the cables. I tried to run. Kalen walked toward her. He kept the heavy chrome barrel pointed at her face. The red indicator light glowed in the dim cavern. The explosive charge whined, cycling the next round into the chamber. You sat in the shade, Kalen stated. The words fell like heavy iron anvils, crushing her narrative. Lyra blinked. The mask slipped a fraction of an inch. What? You walked to the holler. You climbed into the passenger seat. You shot the nomadic trader in the chest. You stole his water. You left him bleeding in the ash. Panic replaced the faux terror. She looked at the smoking barrel of the Magnum. She looked at Kalen's dead, empty eyes. She recognized the truth. The merchant died. A monster stood in his place. She changed tactics. She tried bargaining. I require the credits, she pleaded. The dredge kills people like me. I require the colonies. I require the sky. Take half. We split the titanium. You return to Sector 0. You build a new shop. You require a tomb, Kalen said. He pulled the trigger. The second explosive round vaporized the lie. The kinetic impact threw her backward into the deep shadows. Silence reclaimed the lithium mine, broken only by the hiss of the dying chemical flare. Mercer stepped into the cavern. Proxy followed, the amber eye scanning the carnage. Kalen stood over the spilled titanium credits. He lowered the smoking Magnum. He stared at the dark stain spreading across the cavern floor. He offered zero emotion. He offered zero remorse. The contract ends, Mercer said. He pointed at the polymer bag. Gather your currency. We claimed the remaining sky skiff. We returned to the grid. Kalen shook his head. He kicked a stack of cred sticks into the dust. The grid holds zero value, Kalen said. He turned his back on the money. He looked deeper into the black tunnels of the mine. The analog shop burned. The merchant died. I belong to the dark now. The mountain freezes, Mercer warned. You stay in the shaft, you become a ghost. A ghost requires zero oxygen, Kalen replied. A ghost requires zero illusions. Kalen walked past the chemical flare. He stepped out of the green light, vanishing into the pitch-black depths of the subterranean maze. Mercer watched the shadows swallow the man. He offered zero arguments. A man chooses his own graveyard. Mercer bent down. He grabbed the heavy canvas straps of the polymer bag. He hoisted the 80,000 hard credits over his shoulder. The weight felt substantial. A heavy payload for a dead soul. He turned his back on the dead. He walked out of the cavern, leading Proxy back up the tunnel. He emerged into the freezing, starry night. The blue fire of the ruined skiff burned low, reducing the carbon fiber chassis to glowing embers. He approached the remaining Outland scout flyer. He checked the ignition. He engaged the primary turbines, steering the agile craft away from the dead peak, leaving the ghosts to haunt the deep wastelands.